Hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, July 7th, 2025. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Bauer.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, we have, by way of introductions, our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who's on my right at the end of the dais. We also have our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, who is on my left at the other end of the dais. And we will make other introductions of staff and presenters as agenda items come forward. Would want to let folks know that we have a copy of meeting materials for the public in the back of the room on the table under the big clock. We also have extra copies of the agenda that are yours to have and use throughout the meeting if you want to follow along. But we do just have the one set of meeting materials for the public, so we do ask that you share. Want to remind folks, too, if you have a cell phone, to be sure that that is silenced or otherwise doesn't disrupt tonight's meeting. With that, we'll go ahead and ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with that, then next on our agenda is consideration of tonight's agenda, and I'll check, as we always do, to start with Mr. Trudgeon to see if there are any changes to the agenda from a staff perspective this evening.
There are no changes to the agenda.
All right, and then we'll check with council members. Council members, do you have any changes you'd like to make to the agenda or any items from the consent agenda that you'd like to remove for separate consideration this evening?
Did we want to add or make that change, just a small change from Ms. Olson about the vacancies for the youth commissioners?
Right, so there's no actual change to the agenda itself, but the materials under item 10E, related to youth commissioner vacancies, we did receive word from one of the youth commissioners that had not yet given us information that they do want to be reappointed. And so we do have a bench handout for the council, as well as that's updated in the meeting materials for the public as to that individual seeking reappointment. So we'll note that, but no change to the agenda.
And I will mention that as part of the consent agenda summary about that additional name.
All right. Very good.
I'd like to move the youth commissioner vacancy up from the consent agenda to the regular agenda.
All right.
Is that E?
That is
That is
10E,
E.
right. Are there any other changes to the agenda this evening? Otherwise, a motion to, I should do a quick check with members of the public. Is anyone from the public here for one of the items in the consent agenda that we just were talking about, items 10A through I? If you're here for a comment or question on one of those, we can, like we did for Councilmember Bauer, take that off the consent from the end of the meeting and move it to the beginning of the meeting earlier so that we can give you a chance to ask your question or make your comment without having to stay to the end. Is there anyone here for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? Does not appear to be the case. Then a motion to approve the agenda as amended would be in order.
So, second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda this evening. Next on our agenda is our first opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak on items that are not on this evening's agenda, but may be of interest to people in the community or related to city business that once again isn't on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone here this evening to speak under general public comment this evening? Does not appear to be the case. With that, then, we'll proceed with our agenda. And right to items removed from the consent agenda. We haven't had that change for a while. So we'll take up item 10E, and I'll first turn it over to City Manager Trudgeon to introduce this item for council consideration.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 10E declares vacancies for youth commissioners on various city commissions and does reappoint youth commissioners asking to serve another term. Those being reappointed as part of this action would be Gwen Godekin to the Equity and Inclusion Commission, Audrey Arneson to the Parks and Recreation Commission, Kirsten Bauer and Alexis Gendro to the Public Works, Environment, and Transportation Commission. So this action would do two things. It would reappoint those folks and then also declare vacancies under other commissions, some of which never had a youth commissioner, but we still would advertise for that, and other ones replacing those that aren't. And that's the action in front of you tonight.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And Councilmember Bauer, as to the item being removed for separate consideration.
Just note that, knowing that it's such a wonderful program that we have with the youth commissioners, I've talked to a number of them, and they've really enjoyed such a program. One question I have for the council is the meeting attendance requirements. We don't currently have meeting attendance requirements. I'm wondering if that's something that we should consider in this case. There is just one applicant here that's made just half of the meetings. I tried looking through the city code. I don't believe I saw anything that is a requirement, by something we should maybe address going forward. But wanted to bring it up to council's a discussion here if that's something we should consider. I am very happy about having youth commissioners on there, and so making half the meetings, in my opinion, is still sufficient. But wanted to have that discussion.
Okay, and I'm trying to remember on our overall commission code, I think we do make reference to attendance as being sort of a factor in considering reappointment. I'm not sure if we have anything more specific than that, Mr. Trudgeon.
No, my recollection, without looking at it, is that we do notify the council of attendance issues for any commission member, and the council reserves the right to take that into account, either reappointment or, if need be, to remove them from commission. Usually what we do is share the information and try to have some conversations to see if there's some other issues in play, but ultimately the council can make that decision to not reappoint based on that, or to remove based on lack of attendance.
Right. Does council wish to revisit that as an item at a future agenda for discussion, or where are we at? Thoughts, Councilmember Schroeder?
Yes, I think so. I think it would be something that we should clarify for sure. And I think it's good to know, that kind of information, even though you may not use it, or you may, but I think it's something that we could easily have the same thoughts from all commission members.
Same requirements, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Bauer?
Yeah, I think it may be worth us expanding and bringing forth consideration of youth commissioners overall policy. I think we have youth commissioners kind of spread throughout the city code. And it may make sense for us to look at that again and evaluate, such as positions or roles that they may have on the youth commission, as well as certain privacy and safety requirements, since they are minors. May be worth us addressing and see if there's deficiencies.
So just to that, I believe that we do have the youth commissioner area is a specific part of the commission code, the main code at the beginning of the commission section of our city code. So I think that is kind of grouped together as it's covered in the code. I can't remember for sure if we had a separate policy document about some of the matters, or if it's all in the code. I'm sort of getting an indication from our assistant city manager that it is probably all in the code in that regard, so we would be able to refer to that. But we can certainly have the discussion if that's where the council would like to go. And Councilmember Strawn.
Well, I know in the 4 years that I've been on council, we have discussed this pretty exhaustively, and we did come up with some significant alterations, and so I don't know if there's a big need. I know that for a while we struggled to get adequate commission interest, and I am hesitant to apply the same rules exactly for the youth commissioners, because high school can be pretty unpredictable. If you're in pep band, you might not know when, that you have to be there on a Wednesday in February when you sign up in September. So I think that 50% is pretty good, and I do know that but maybe not, depends on the person. And I think we have asked in the past, we've asked the chair of each commission for information about, their contribution, and if they're an active member while they're in the meetings, and also whether or not they participate in other events throughout the year. That may not be indicative of how they actually participate. But we already put quite a few significant barriers on who can be part of this by requiring that the person they have to be a Roseville resident. Even if they attend Roseville High School, they can't participate if they're not, even if they spend the majority of their day in Roseville, if they don't actually physically reside here. And so I want to make sure that we aren't that our rules aren't so restrictive, because we clearly still have 3 positions that have been vacant, and for several years, we had all positions vacant. And that's just going to kind of depend on the kids and the timing and everything else. But I think we have to realize that high school is not the same as an adult's commitment, because you're going to have a better understanding. So while I think we could revisit, I know we spent a lot of time on this a couple years ago, and I don't know that we need to spend a ton more time on it, revisiting it at this point, since we made such significant decisions at that point. And I do think that sometimes things can be just reviewed, and you know, if there's a question for someone who wasn't on the council at the time, they certainly could review that policy and the time that went into, and the decisions that happened at that time.
Great. Councilmember Groff?
Well, I don't mind revisiting if we keep it to a short thing. I don't think this is going to be a full meetings conversation or something. I would hope not. The thing I see here is I hope we're letting them know when they're starting that it is a commitment. I don't expect them to be the same as another member. I don't remember, do we have are they all voting members, or just some of them?
They can be,
They
it's
can
an
be.
option.
Yeah, so then there is a commitment there, there's a time commitment. We have to be flexible because they're high school students. We don't want to eliminate them just because they're busy with other activities. So I would not put it at the same as what we expect of our other commission members. If we had long lines of people waiting to get on these as youth commissioners, it would be a different conversation for me, but I want to have us have a maximum flexibility on it, so that's where I would land.
All right. And just looking at the code, we do talk about the appointment of youth commissioners, terms. We have a general attendance section on members in general. There's sort of a 30%. If you miss more than 30%, that's a notification to the council, or 3 straight meetings in a row. It's a notification, and then that just is taken into account by the council. As far as I can tell, I believe some of the other information for youth commissioners about, you know, whether they choose to be voting members or not, that might be part of the application materials rather than in the code itself. And so it may make sense to follow up with the council on those materials, just so we have that in advance of looking at having a discussion in the future. Councilmember Bauer.
Right, and I read exactly what you just mentioned here at this meeting. And the reason I brought this up was because of that 30% requirement. And, you know, and if we follow the rules that what we have in the city code, this would be an issue with this 50%. Hence me bringing this forth, should we revisit it to make it more flexible, like Councilmember Groff had mentioned, and that's what I'm in favor of
Got it.
doing.
Okay.
Which does not exist there, even though it was looked at, how many years ago?
Sure.
2 to 3.
And honestly, I don't know in that review how much detail we went into about specifically youth commissioner attendance, perhaps. So if that's a sort of an additional topic, or a topic we want to do some clarification on, it may make sense. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, I want to clarify, it's more, and I think in there it says it's more to notify the council. It doesn't mean they're not going to continue on a commission, it's just more if, you know, to keep us informed on the attendance, and that would just be more information. Again, it doesn't mean that people would not be reappointed or be on the commission for that. But I think it is worthwhile just to know if, and to make sure and that we can visit with them and say, hey, is this too much of a burden for you? I mean,
And to be clear,
yes.
not the council
Right,
visiting with
right,
them, but
right.
the staff.
But
following
yeah,
up,
that's
right,
what I
yeah.
mean. So that way, you know, there's some, the people know to maybe work with them to see, because sometimes they might take on something and it might be too much. And then it might be hard for them to back out, and so to give them an option to make sure everything is still good for them.
So perhaps we can bring back an item for consideration about looking at the attendance policy as it relates to youth commissioners, and if we want to have a different language or standard as it relates to youth commissioners, and that would be the specific topic.
I'd be in favor of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Right, then we have the item before us. I guess since we pulled it from the consent agenda, we'll just do a quick check. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item before the council takes up this matter? All right, does not appear to be the case. Then a motion to approve a motion to accept or reappoint the commissioners, youth commissioners interested in reappointment, and then declare vacancies for the other positions would be in order as outlined in the
moved.
bench handout.
So moved.
All right, I think it's been moved by Councilmember
Second.
Strawn. Okay. Moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder, to reappoint those who are eligible and seeking reappointment as youth commissioners, and then to declare the vacancies in the other seats. Discussion on that motion as the maker, Councilmember Strawn.
Nothing further.
Okay, as the seconder, Councilmember Schroeder. All right, additional discussion?
Just to clarify, that does include all of them that are have expressed
Right,
interest.
with today's
It's not
update
taking
in the
somebody
bench
off.
handout,
Okay,
right,
thank
exactly,
you.
yeah. I mean, unless somebody makes that motion specifically, right
I just
now it
wanted to be
includes
sure.
everybody on the list.
Because of the discussion,
Yeah.
I wanted to be sure that's what we're doing.
Okay. All right, we've got that motion before us then. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
Abstain.
Oh, all right, I didn't think there would be an abstention. All right, passes 4-0
I
with
appreciate
an
that.
abstention by
I don't
Councilmember
wanna
Bauer,
make a decision on my own.
who has a family member
Yes.
up for appointment.
Yeah,
All right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. With that, then, that does pass 4-0 with one abstention from Councilmember Bauer. That brings us then to our business items for this evening. And our first business item is item 7A, which is to receive information from the police department in regard to their resource and operational efficiency plan and implementation of the recommendations that were brought forward to the council in the report at our last meeting by the Axtel Group. We have our chief and deputy chief with us this evening. So welcome and look forward to your presentation.
Good evening. We just figured out about 15 minutes ago that we've got a full hour, so we thought it was just going to be a half hour. So now we've got plenty of time.
It's okay.
No pressure.
I think
We've
that might
read
have
the
been a typo.
materials.
It's a typo. You just have 15 minutes.
Don't feel you have to fill it.
Well, appreciate being able to be here tonight and really talk about kind of our next steps forward as we look to the future after the Axtel report came out a couple weeks ago. I'll start off by saying or talking about. I often have like tour groups come through, especially kids, and they ask what my job is. What does a chief actually do? And I often say my job is to support the men and women that work in this agency that answer 911 calls. And I really feel like that's what this report was all about, to make sure that we've got the right operations in place, the right structure in place, and the right staffing so that our officers can do the job that they need to do, and that our support staff can do the job that they do with the department. So really, this Axtel report, I think, did a really good job of taking a holistic report or a holistic view of the department and help us kind of provide us with the groundwork so that we could come up with a 5-year implementation plan. And I just want to make sure to start off by also thanking the council. We really appreciate your support in making this happen. I think, as I mentioned early on, we had never done this kind of study. We kind of piecemealed things together at what our needs were, but to really look at it holistically and figure out what is the roadmap forward, because we certainly know the world has changed, policing has changed, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to improve. Another thing that kind of came out of this report is we know we can't get this done all at once. I'm kind of a doer, so as I was reading the report, you're ready to just put things in motion, and we realized this needs to be strategic. We need to look at what we can do over the next 5 years to make some improvements and make sure the department is headed in the right direction. So we're really going to talk tonight mostly about 2026, but also kind of laying the groundwork for where we see the next 4 or 5 years also developing. So with that, just a quick recap of kind of how we got here, and I'm not going to go through all the slides, just kind of touch upon it. Obviously, this study launched in January. I will tell you, it was a huge lift. There was so much data that we pulled, and that was why it was really important to go with an outside consultant that could do that work. But there's a number of people in our police department. Deputy Chief Adams here was the main point of contacting in getting all this data, because the consultants obviously did the work, but they had to be supplied the data. So there were a number of people, not only within the police department, but in the city, just the finance department, human resources, that really helped us out. So I just want to acknowledge that work as well. And really, when we started this work with the Axtel Group, I had a number of conversations, and I said, we're not looking for a checklist or just a pat on the back of what we're doing well. We truly want to make improvements, and we want to do better. And I think that was kind of the overall mission of this study, is how can we be a better department? Kind of brings us to where we are tonight and some of the key recommendations. And I know it's a very long report, but in the 90-some page report, there was really these key recommendations in different buckets that the Axtell group identified. And really, we sat down with a 5-year plan and figured out what are the top priorities, what do we need to be focused on right now, and what can we maybe wait until 27, 2028, or even into the future. Because, as I mentioned, we knew we could not get this all done, not only from a resource perspective, but also just financially. So the full report, just to add, is on our website, now on the police department website. So if people haven't seen it, they can certainly go to that direct link. I will tell you one of the things that when this report came out, it was like, let's get moving on this. This is not a let's wait till 2026. We've already done a number of, I think, improvements, and we're already seeing some success. This is just a quick list of some of the operation implementations we've made to try to improve some of our operations, reduce some of the frustrations, and hopefully work to be a better department. And one of the things that we talk to our staff of each division is, what can you do within your own division right now? Not waiting until 2026, but what can you do now? And I can tell you, I've already heard from a lot of people that some of these changes are really helping. One of the things, I'll just give as an example, we knew communication was an issue. I think that was pretty clear in the report that we needed to do better on that. And one of the specific items was roll call trainings, or roll call briefings. They were kind of run different ways. It was sometimes hard to access information, and so we sat down with another department that's using Teams, and we've now implemented a Teams roll call that all of the officers can pull up on their phone. Much easier to access information, and it's making that operation much more efficient. So just an example of something that didn't need to wait for budgets or for a different year. We're really trying to improve those things now. So the next phase, I'm just going to talk about what we're recommending for 2026, and that's kind of the bulk of what we'll talk about tonight. Certainly happy to answer additional questions. I do want to take an opportunity, because this came up at the Axtell group discussion, and I didn't want to jump in because it was getting late in the night, but it came up about our facility needs. And I just wanted to address, we have some significant facility issues. Unfortunately, when our department was built 20-some years ago, there was no planning for the future. When we moved in 20-some years ago, we took up every space. So although I think we've tried to be creative in reusing closets that are now offices, we've converted our interview rooms. We used to have 3, we now have 1, because those spaces have to be used for other things. So as I often joke, the only unused space we have is an elevator, which doesn't seem like it would be a great space for an office, but there are those needs are real, and I can tell you there's frustrations throughout our departments that I hear about of just not having enough space. And we've done some things working with the city manager for our CAT team to take over some space, but without a doubt, our building just was not designed 20 years ago for the future. We've got, and I can tell you in the women's locker room, we are out of lockers. So that is a problem. I haven't quite come up with a great solution, but it's things like that, you just reach your capacity. So since it came up, I wanted to make sure to at least touch on that quickly. Shifting back to really what the Axtell group and what this study was about is really identifying our priorities starting in 2026. And we've really identified some critical staffing needs that I believe are critical to our mission. And these didn't come as a surprise. We've known that there's a lot of things stretched really thin, but what we're going to be recommending for 2026 is to add 1 patrol officer to each of the 4 patrol teams. So we've got 4 patrol teams, 2 days, 2 nights, and we're recommending adding 1 patrol officer to each of those shifts. And we really believe that's going to help with response times. It's going to help with just having more resources out there. So that's the first thing that we're going to be recommending. The second one is enhancing our supervisory coverage, and Deputy Chief Adams is going to talk a little bit about how important that role is and what that need is. And then the last 2026 recommendation is to strengthen our records and property operations. And that's having a dedicated person that can help both divisions. There were some, in the report, it talked about maybe adding 2 positions. We've really tried to look at, could we start with 1 that provides support both to our records team and to our property room operations. And I'll get into a little bit more depth on those. kind of just breaking down kind of the why behind these asks, and I'll start kind of with our case numbers. When you look at the Axtell Group report, I think it was pretty clear and consistent that our call volumes have gone up. Across the years, it continues to increase. There's a lot of different ways to calculate our numbers, depending on if you include only dispatch case numbers, if you include all the cases that come into us other ways. The chart that we have up here is kind of our standard one that we use that includes everything. And when you look at those numbers or you look at any of the charts, our calls do continue to go up. Back at 2017, we averaged about 100 calls per service or incidents a day. That was total case numbers. Now we're sitting at about 122. I can tell you there was a day within about the last 2 weeks that we were much higher. We're sitting above 150 for one day. That's typical for summer. You start seeing calls kind of go up and you have those spikes, but that definitely has increased over the years. And I think the quote that from the Axtell Group that really captured the issue is we've been able to maintain service levels, but we're really doing it by stretching our officers thin, and it's just not sustainable. We did add 2 patrol officers a number of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, but when you look overall, over the last 2 decades, we have not made any kind of significant increases to the frontline patrol officers that are responding to calls, and that's where we're looking to invest in for 2026. And it isn't just about talking about more officers. It really is about those response times, making sure that we're taking care of our officers, making sure that they're not just running call to call, that we're able to do that proactive, getting out into our neighborhoods and talking to people, which I know was something that was really important in the community voice for the Axtell Group. This next chart was actually taken directly from the Axtell report, and what they found is we are writing significantly more reports. I think that's really important to just highlight that, because not only are the officers spending more time writing reports, but those reports have to make its way all the way through the system. And so when you look upstream or downstream, whichever way you're looking, it's creating work for everybody along the way that has to touch that report, from the evidence and property room manager who's now taking evidence in, to our person that handles body-worn camera footage. There's just so much more to the detectives that actually have to work these cases or get them charged. So when you look at those numbers, we found the reports written increased by about 38% between 2021 and 2024. And we are looking at ways to kind of reduce the amount of time officers spend. There's just so many more requirements, especially on the FBI side, of entering data, that it really, even though we thought technology was going to make our lives easier, there's just a lot more data you have to enter. So, and this was just one example. I could have used a number of different locations, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the impacts that we've seen. This chart here is showing calls for service at the Oasis and the Harbor. I'm not picking on them, I just pulled out this data. I think if you looked at other developments, you'd see similar results. And just as an example, before that property was developed, prior to 2021, we didn't have a lot of calls. In 2021, when it was under construction, we had 2 calls to those addresses. You fast forward to 2024, and we had over 600 calls. And so when you take all of the different developments that we've seen over like a 5-10 year period, you start to see some of those strains and kind of where they came from. So again, not picking on the Oasis or the Harbor, but any of these developments, you just see calls being impacted by them. And this last slide that I'll go through before I kind of turn it over to Deputy Chief Adams is really kind of the why. It kind of summarizes, we really have not invested in our patrol staffing, our frontline officers, the ones responding to 911 calls, and we know that work is getting more complex, population changes, and really just increased call volumes. And really we believe that by adding 1 patrol officer to each crew, we really believe that that's going to have an impact not only on being able to address those calls, but also on officer wellness, that we can make sure that we're taking care of our officers so they're not just running call to call every day. So it goes above just addressing calls, but also kind of gets into that employee wellness piece that we think is so important. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Adams to kind of talk about the ask behind, or the why behind adding 2 supervisors.
Appreciate that, Chief. So I'll start out by saying I've had the opportunity, so as the chief, to work a lot of different areas within our police department throughout our careers. We've both been here our entire adult lives in the city of Roseville, which is not a bad thing. We both love it. But I will say this. Our sergeants are the most important piece of our police department. We love all of our staff. But our sergeants are the ones going to the calls and making those split-second decisions on the high-stress calls, sometimes at 3 a.m., and we trust them to do a lot. This is an extremely important piece, and you'll find that throughout all of law enforcement. So what you're looking at here is we're trying to kind of just paint a picture of what a typical day could look like in some of our hiring. On the left is an actual shift that we staffed recently, and I'll come back to that, but another component that I want you to look at on the right is some of our hiring. Over the last 2 years, we've been extremely fortunate, but it's almost been Achilles' heel. We've hired 20 new officers in the last 2 years, which has been great. But about half of our police department has under 5 years on. So on any given day, this is one of our evening shifts that we're showing here, our seniority drops off drastically. And at night, our minimum staffing can go down to 4 officers. So if the sergeant wasn't on and that 3-year officer was off, there's a potential that everybody that's making the most critical decision in the city, we could have 2 officers with 2 years and 2 officers with 1 year. Now, we hire great, but there's no substitute for experience, no substitute for training, and everything to do with that. Next slide, please. So even when our sergeants are here, one thing that we did want to point out is in our police department and throughout the metro, our sergeants wear a lot of hats. They're in charge of training. They're in charge of recruitment. They're in charge of our field training process. And so they do a lot of different things. And this routinely pulls them away from a lot of the things that they should be doing, and they get task saturated in a hurry. And so as we talk about this a little bit more of our ask, it's something that I think is extremely important that we haven't had the benefit of doing, of being able to diversify what the sergeants do while they are here. And so to align with the best practices, as the chief said, we would like to add 2 additional sergeants. This would allow for a complete redundancy on every core shift that we have. We would have 2 sergeants on on each of our day shifts and 2 sergeants on each of our night shifts. In both 2023 and 2024, with some of the absences that we had each year, there were 1,000 hours that we went without a supervisor on the street. Over 1,000 hours each one of those years. And by having that redundancy of the sergeants here, it wouldn't be a 100% catch-all, but it would certainly increase the odds of us having a supervisor here a lot more. And like I said before, there's no substitute for formalized training. And we really shouldn't be, in the Axtel group touched on this, in the business of allowing a 2-year officer to be in control of any dynamic situation that's unfolding at 2 a.m. when they're making that call on behalf of the entire city. It is a huge risk. I do believe that we have officers that can make that decision. But even in the Axtel group, when they polled our officers, over 80%, I think it was just at 80%, said, I don't want to be a sergeant if I don't have to be. That's not my job. I would prefer that we have an actual supervisor on duty. And so it's not even a power struggle. We're saying that from the top with the chief and I, all the way down to the officers also saying, like, I'm not equipped to do this. So all the benefits up here, I mean, a lot of them are self-explanatory of why we should do this. But one piece that I did want to touch on is the increased mentorship. So as we're hiring a lot of these younger officers, like I said, half our department has 5 years or less. They are yearning to be told how to do this job. They want to be led by our sergeants. And unfortunately, if our sergeants are gone, or if they're tied up in a lot of those other ancillary duties, one of the most important aspects that we want our sergeants to be doing, and that's training up our officers to stay here for as long as the chief and I have stayed here, that piece is missing. That is one thing that we've seen time and time again, though, within our police department, is our sergeants have done a great job. Everybody here feels like family. and I think we are hitting the mark on that. However, we're getting close to not being able to address those needs of our officers, especially as we're hiring a lot of officers in their early 20s that are just looking for not only how to handle this job, but even just advice in life. And if our sergeants don't have way to do that, it really it hurts all of us by not making them a whole employee, for lack of a better term. And again, as we go through some of these, the reduced risk and liability is going to be absolutely huge. So this is the last slide on the topic, but I think it's important to highlight what a typical day looks like between time off, training, various types of leave. This is what one of our shifts can look like throughout the day. As it says here, there's no sergeant on this particular day. And again, we didn't try to pick ones that were doom and gloom. There are some that are much worse than this. This is just a typical day. We went 12 hours without a sergeant, but we had officers on vacation. They were on training. They were on leave. We very fortunately just had 2 officers that had children yesterday, which is amazing. But that's 2 more additional officers now that are going to be off. And so this all needs to get accounted for in here. And I honestly believe by adding sergeants and officers, it's really going to give us more time off, more consistent backup for our calls that our officers desperately need, the ability to take uninterrupted meal breaks, the ability to be uninterrupted when you're trying to work out, all of those things. I think it goes way beyond just the tangible, and it goes for the long-term intangible too by adding a lot of these different parts.
And I'll jump back in, just kind of talking about our third staffing ask for 2026, and that really is a mission critical need, and that is with our record and property management. And I'll just kind of go through what we've seen. As noted in the Axtell report, we've been staffed with 2 record staffs that process all of these reports coming in. That level has been the same since I started back in 1997. Our records department is so much more complicated with just their mandates that they need to do. So it's just, we have not kept up. This was just a quick snapshot of some of our comparables. It doesn't have all of them. But if you look at Roseville at 2 and you start looking at some of our other comparable cities, we're well below the average. And it does get a little bit confusing because some agencies, that records tech may also do other jobs as well. So I want to throw that as a disclaimer. You might be like, well, does Burnsville really have 9? Some of those people may have absorbed other duties as well. So not necessarily apples to apples, but without a doubt, no matter how you look at this, Roseville is the only one sitting with 2 people. And this becomes, if one of our record techs went out on any kind of long-term absence or was even gone for a couple of weeks, it really does have significant impacts on our operations of reports getting to where they need to be. I won't go through all this because I think the slide kind of highlights the different data. But I think the main point is our operations have changed, and especially with the records department, we just have not kept up. As noted in the Axtell report, 2024 was the highest call volume, and that call volume generates work downstream for our records staff, and that's really where this issue and this challenge has created. This is just one example. I'm still kind of floored at this. When I see this data, I even asked, are we sure this data is right? This is calls for service at Rosedale Center. And I will tell you, just as a reminder, we had 2 officers that Rosedale is funding. They are doing phenomenal work over there. And if you talk to the stores, you talk to the loss prevention, they are seeing results. It's because they are making arrests. Word is getting out that you can't just go to Rosedale and clean out shelves. It's great, but when you look at the call volume, we just didn't anticipate that. We knew there was going to be some. I had no idea they would be making the number of arrests that they did. Arrests in 2023 was 26. Arrests the following year was 235, so that's after we started this, and we've already surpassed over 300 arrests so far this year, just in year to date. So that work, which is wonderful, word is getting out, we're making Roseville safer, but again, it's the impacts that it's having on our property or in our evidence, on our record staff. Transitioning a little bit to records, just because this position that we're proposing would help not only records, but it also would help the property room. I will tell you, our property room is at capacity. It is, when it was built 20 years ago, We filled it up really quickly, and now we just continue to take things in. And that person, it's really easy to get buried. You have a couple big cases come in, you have a busy weekend like we did this last weekend, and next thing you know, you've got a pile of stuff that you just can't get to on top of doing all the other duties that you do. So just wanted to highlight kind of the need for that. So transition a little bit to operational goals, and we're not going to go through all of these. It's in the document that we attached. Happy to answer any specific questions, but this isn't all about adding people and adding more staff. We're really trying to look at how do we do things smarter. And I think I just want to highlight, we're really looking at this being a 5-year plan that not only looks at adding staff, but also looks at operational efficiencies. How can we do things better? And we'll transition to phase 2 priorities, which Joe was going to do. And we're not going to go in as much depth. We'll kind of do more of a high overview, but certainly if you guys have questions at the end, happy to address those. So I'll turn it over to Joe to just kind of go over kind of 2027's recommendations.
So our phase 1 that we just talked about focused primarily on patrol response, but as the chief kind of had mentioned, there's a lot of downstream things that happen when we really start to increase our caseload. So phase 2 proposes an increase in investigative staffing for the most part and the digital evidence management. But year over year, our detectives' caseload continue to grow both in volume and in complexity. Unfortunately, this means some of the lower level crimes that we're receiving, they just don't have the capacity sometimes to investigate them, which is really unfortunate because a lot of times that involves directly our citizens that aren't receiving the service that we want to provide them. To help address this, we're proposing an addition of 1 additional detective, and we do believe that 1 additional detective on that unit would help reduce the caseload for everybody else and help them really start to be able to get to some of the cases that they need to get to that have been kind of getting shelved over the last couple of years. The next position is to expand digital evidence management. And so you already saw the picture of our evidence room of all like the physical items. But as you guys can imagine, over the last handful of years, the digital evidence is that exponentially. Everybody now has surveillance cameras, which have the ability to email us, and then we have to store them. We have body camera, we have squad camera. I mean, anything digital that you could think of that comes into us, we have to store. And not only do we have to store it, once it's stored, it has to get pushed out to attorneys that are prosecuting the case, or it has to get pushed out to different areas. And that is all work. And as an example, our city attorney that covers the criminal side for us had to hire a whole new staff just to take on some of the discovery and some of the items that we are continually pushing towards them, because they ran out of capacity just due to Roseville and the amount of cases that we've really been pushing towards them. Some more operational enhancements, and these are just things like the chief had mentioned that we've been trying to think of that may have some money, but it might be a one-time thing. It's not a long-term staffing plan, but just trying to get smarter about some of the operations that we do. And you guys can read these, but the one big piece, as you all know, is we did receive a grant for accreditation, which is now getting off the ground with the Axtel group. And in there, they're really going to help us try to make sure that A, we're up to the best standards, but B, try to find smarter ways to be doing some of the things that we've been doing over the years to make sure that we're doing the best and the most with the current staffing model that we do have. Phase 3 priorities for 2028 now, so now we're looking a little further into the future. Another huge piece that we haven't really touched on too much here is our training. Roseville prides itself in the fact that we do a lot of our training in-house, and a lot of that training is in person. There's some departments that have gone pretty much all virtual with their training, which has some great abilities for time efficiency and for like not having to be present in actual physical space. But time and time again, we're finding out that digital training or web-based training doesn't really do what we need it to do. The post board who handles our license is every single year increasing some of the post mandates that we have to go through, which is great. We are one of the most professionalized states in the entire country, but we need somebody to manage that. Currently, as on one of the first slides that I had shown, we have a lot of sergeants that are in charge of managing a crew. that are also then doing a firearms range or also doing de-escalation training or whatever it might be. It's best practice to have somebody who can physically do that training, who can run the academy, who can be at the driving school, who can do those things, as opposed to having it be ancillary across multiple different employees. And that's what we're proposing for 2028. Additionally, we're proposing to expand our investigative support through an additional analyst. We've been extremely fortunate to have an analyst position, but as the world has evolved, so too is that position. We're now asking our current analyst, it says in the Extel group, to do a lot of different things, from body cams to cell phones, but to their real job of doing investigations work, of analyzing some of the video, of getting out and talking to other metro agencies to try to solve crimes, to ask, getting crime trends and crime stats to the chief and I. Those are truly two different spots. We really need a criminal analyst or an investigative analyst and an administrative analyst, and really to operate at peak performance. That's what we're proposing for 2028. Further things that we'll do, again, these are just more of the operational enhancements, but we want to continue to goal set for the chief and I and the administrative staff to continue to look down the line at things that we think are achievable and tangible and things that'll make this place run smoother. And that's just everything from currently we have our sergeants, when we have our minimum staffing, as I showed, are in the mix, where best practice would be to pull them out. So we always have to have a sergeant, we always have to have a minimum amount of officers, and so they're not blended together. We want to develop further leadership programs and, like the chief had mentioned, conduct facility needs assessments to look into the future to make sure that if we're able to hire more, we have a place to put them.
And I'll jump into phase 4. And no, we did not lose track of a year. We skipped a year. And the reason we built that in is kind of a gap year or a just catch up. We realize things happen. There might be some of these just because of budgetary challenges or just because of workload that we don't get to. In addition, I think it's really hard to project what we're going to need. Hard to even see where the world will be. My hope is maybe we have less police calls. That would be wonderful, and we need less people. So phase 4 is kind of like a placeholder of some of the things that I think we need to do. In the document, I did talk about adding 2 additional patrol officers to build kind of a retail unit, but that's kind of just a pencil in. I think we really need to, in 2029, relook at where we're at before we come up with a firm ask. But these are kind of just the things that we penciled in for 2030, knowing that in 2029, kind of that gap year, we're going to reevaluate where we're at, what's worked, can we do things smarter, as Deputy Chief Adams talked about. So this is kind of just a quick timeline that everything that we talked about in the last 20 minutes, a little bit longer than 20 minutes, this is kind of the overview of it. Probably should have just started with this and said, do you have any questions? But since we had the full hour, we thought, that's it, we're going. But no, this kind of just breaks it down. Again, 2029, we don't have anything penciled in for that right now, but this is what we believe based on the data, based on the Axtel group, where we need to go. I know a big thing is what are the costs. It's still really early to get concrete numbers, but we did reach out to finance and ask them to kind of build us what the most likely scenario would be. I will note that this is for the 2026, the ask of one patrol officer on each crew, so 4 patrol officers, 2 patrol sergeants, and a record supervisor. We also did just submit a grant application for the COPS grant that we had on the consent agenda a couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago now. We did get that grant application in. We won't know about that until the fall, and that's only partially helping to fund the 4 officers that we're asking for. So with that, before I end, I just wanted to throw this slide in. After the Axtel report came out, I met with every one of the crews. And I thought one of the officers had a really good point. Don't forget about that we're people. And sometimes that gets lost. We talk about a lot of data, and we talk about calls, and we talk about all these charts. So I thought it was really important to end with, we have some amazing, amazing men and women that continue to answer the call. And really what this is about is providing them the support and the resources that we believe that they need based on the data that we've analyzed. But I just thought it was a fitting to not end with a chart or a title or budget stuff, but to end with the people, because that really is what makes our department. It is the people, it's the men and women that come in day after day, whether we're short or not, they're coming in and they're going to get the job done. So with that, both Deputy Chief Adams and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you for all of that information, and I know I was pleased by the report that the Extel group provided, and hopefully you were too. It was just really thorough. We've gotten many reports since I've been on council, and I don't know, it felt very 360 compared to some of them that we received. It felt really 3D, like we could see all sides of it. So hopefully you felt that as well. A couple things, the HR director in me is talking. So as you talk about coverage, understanding that maybe you didn't notice, but in January 1st, 2026, there's a required half-hour unpaid meal break. And so that may be different from how for any 8-hour shift. So, I mean, you probably work through your meals kind of thing. And so then having this requirement, suddenly that really does bring the need for another human to be present, to be really important, because how else do you fulfill that aspect if you don't have that other human? And then bridging that big gap between the 0 to 1 year and the 20 plus years, there's a lot in between, and that's in a lot of fields, but clearly in policing, that's been really a big deal. And so I think that importance of that training supervisor who's kind of, I'm taking the time to identify like replacement planning, building and growing internal staff like yourselves, who is identifying the high potential individuals and not only mentoring and coaching, but really building and growing and seeing that opportunity. And so I think that's where you see a really strong need. It may seem like a pie in the sky wish, but those are the kind of things that feed retention in any field, and especially in a high stress field. You know, I was appreciative that you were looking eventually at the shift length, because I know that can be really challenging. We talked about, you know, if you get 60 hours or whatever, you get 6 days a year of vacation time when you have a 12-hour shift. So it can be really challenging for all these people who are having babies. They're at the, you know, go to T-ball kind of phase in life. They're not at the get a call from the kid at college once a month. So I really appreciate how those kind of fit into these and other requirements, but I do think it's really important for everyone else to recognize that some of that is not even just wishful thinking, but it's really state mandated that we have to, we're a union shop, but we're also an employer that has to abide by the state of Minnesota rules, and those are some that these would help us fulfill.
Councilmember Groff?
Oh, thank you for the report, and I certainly echo what Councilmember Strawn said. Some of the reports aren't as thorough as this, and it was really informative, and I appreciate you being here because the information is out there, but residents probably don't wade through those reports like we do, and having it spoken and said here is important, even if it's just a brief overview. I think all of the things you've gone over are very necessary, very required. I never hear from residents that we want fewer police in Roseville. Of course, everyone wants us to pay attention to taxes, but they do want to be safe. I mean, that's number one in what they want with the city. So I think your program, I appreciate you breaking it down into different phases, because it's hard as a person who doesn't work in policing to know what would be the most important. Prioritizing things is more difficult, so that was helpful for me to see the breakdown, and I fully support everything you brought forth tonight.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Schroeder?
Yes, thank you for everything. And I have to say, I appreciate getting these reports earlier so we have time to go through them, because when you have a 90-page report, it's nice to have more than like a weekend to go through it, so greatly appreciated that. And I'll echo some things that Councilmember Groff said, that when talking to residents, safety is priority, and people in Roseville really, really appreciate the police department. And so I think it's easy to be able to support the resources in this area. You know, the report talked about how great you guys are doing with such short resources, but that's not doable. And so for you guys to continue to do your job, you're going to need the resources. So I absolutely get that. But I have to say, one of the things I was surprised about was how software and IT was such a detriment to you guys getting your jobs done. And so, you know, any way to get some of that banged out, I think would be good, because I think that shouldn't be a bottleneck for you, you know, and that it's causing more and more time spent on something that it shouldn't be. So I would say maybe trying to figure out a way to get some of that banged out. And I think one thing people forget, and I thank you for showing some of the, I know we're not picking on developments and things, but what you're saying is, when we add housing, which is something we've always wanted to do, people sometimes forget about the infrastructure under that, which includes your department. And so we want to make sure when we add housing that part of that equation is we are going to provide a safe place for people to live. So I think that's really important. And yeah, I was the one who brought up the space space needs. And I don't know how much I'd wait on that one either. As we are discussing some of this campus development thing and reusing spaces and trying to decide what should go where, I would say raise your voice a little bit, because I've been over to the police station and I can't imagine you guys can put one more pencil in that place. So yeah, that's space needs. I think if you can, you know, especially when you look at the records area and locker room and all that, those, I mean, people think, oh, you know, it's no big deal, but those are important areas too. So again, all of these pieces. So let's make sure we can get the resources that are needed, and I think most residents would consider prioritizing this in our upcoming budget. So again, appreciate everything, and again, make sure you ask for what is necessary so you guys can get your jobs done.
Any other questions, feedback? Councilmember Bauer.
Again, I was second with Councilmember Schroeder. I was surprised at the IT needs and the difficulty that the RMS system as it stands does right now. I know there's other ones. I'd be curious to see going forward, if, you know, what the costs are associated with that to alleviate some of that pain from you. Hopefully find some more efficiencies there. You know, I don't know what the number is, and I don't expect you to have that number now, but I would be curious to know that, because I agree, those should not be the things that we are having our patrols working on. And I do hope with these numbers here, what you're asking for 2026 will allow officers to take the time off that they desperately need to attend their child's T-ball games and whatnot as well. So I think that will be a great improvement. And my final question is, with the ask that you have here, do you foresee any challenges filling those roles besides the, you know, ongoing challenges there are, but feel comfortable that you'll be able to fill these, in this case, 6 officer roles in 2026?
I do. We've had great support from the city manager. We're nearly fully staffed. I expect us to be fully staffed by the end of the summer. And so I think that we will be able to. I think. And just one other thing I just wanted to do with both of you, bringing it up with the IT, kudos to the city manager, because he recognized that was, after reading this report as well, we've already set up several meetings with Metro INET to see what can we do with our current, you know, agreements. There's been a number of meetings, a number of improvements already being made. So just another example, we're not just sitting hoping like someday this will fix itself. But I know, although there's a lot of room to go, we've been able to work with Metro INET to get some things in place and to get a little bit more the workflow working better, so that support is happening quicker, and it really is making a difference.
Now, just note on regarding the space also, when you think about then discussing that about, you know, designing a space or asking for a space that would allow training to be here. I know that there's a lot of travel involved right now with the training that you do, having to go to ranges elsewhere and facilities elsewhere. And I know other departments don't have that kind of burden.
Right, and I will echo virtually everything that was said here, and appreciate likewise the report from Axtel Group and this follow-up from the department, because this is really the department's baby here in terms of putting together, okay, how do we take those recommendations and put them into a plan? So I really do appreciate that and the thought and the work that went into it, especially thinking about it in terms of phasing. Budget decision makers love phasing. It's a wonderful thing from the point of view of trying to make sure we get the highest priority things first, and then not miss the things that are still maybe not as high but aren't not priorities. So I think that's appreciated. And I was thinking as we were talking about the example of the developments, I think the point probably wasn't so much that a development leads to a bunch of calls, or even that a certain type of development leads to a bunch of calls. I think the point was more people leads to more calls, and we see that on the fire and emergency medical as well. Obviously, we have our demographics weigh into that somewhat on the medical side of things, but I think our average household size probably in 1972 was maybe 4 or something like that. And now our average household size hovers below 2. So even if we just took the houses we have and put more people in them, we're still going to have more people. We're going to have more calls, and so I think that's the important thing to think about. Is it's really just when you have more people in your community, even when you have more people coming into your community to shop or to do business or whatever, all those things are what adds up to more calls, because just by the nature of people get into things and situations and whatever it might be. So I just wanted to note that for folks that are looking at those developments. Obviously, developments is a quick way to add people. There's no question about that. But there's other factors that can enter into that, and it's really about the count of folks that kind of creates some of the issues. And the other thing on the IT side of it, I think we have the things we can do with our Metro INET partners and internally, and then we have the things that are sort of imposed upon us by county-wide standard for this or that, and there's not much we can do about it other than I know we've worked hard over the years to have good relationships with all the other entities in the county that are working through the same things, and I think probably that's a part of this as well, as keeping those connections going and working together with everybody to try to resolve the issues that probably everybody is facing. And maybe the standard for the next go-around will be, a different one based on the experience that everybody's had with this one. Because I don't know that the likelihood of us going out on our own in some of these areas can happen either, just because of the fact that the way the county kind of works these things. So wanted to note that. But really do appreciate this. And, thinking about, the number of calls at Rosedale is probably because they realized, okay, we've got this agreement, we've got these officers, and it seems like the retail establishments there are paying more attention to these issues. And those things are going hand in hand. It's not like things weren't happening at Rosedale in those prior years when the level of calls and arrests were lower. It's that those things were happening and nothing was being done about it. So I think that seems to be the change. But the point that we take from that is that when you do something about it, it creates workload, it creates all these records that have to be managed and all those sorts of things. So it goes hand in hand, and hopefully maybe with the deterrent effect of the enforcement at Rosedale, maybe that will inspire other parts of the retail community in Roseville to look at how they can address some of these things too, and maybe overall we can have some decrease in those numbers. It's not probably going to be enough to think that we won't have a general increase over the years just because of the way things go. But if we can have some of those deterrent effects, that can hopefully help the situation in the longer run. So just noting that. I didn't have any specific other questions or requests at this time, but just looking forward to the discussions as we get into the 2026 budget discussion and going forward. And I would just echo the space side of it as well. If we've got something that we've got now that might potentially go away as part of a future plan, maybe we want to think about hanging on to it a little longer or something like that. I want to keep that part of the equation. So always want to be creative in that area. So thank you again. Are there any other questions or comments from the council?
Just a quick comment
Yep.
about the technology. I think that, in a way, we're sort of lucky that we have so many younger Because they grew
Built-in
up with
IT,
technology. Some of us had to learn that as we went through our careers, and it was a different process. But also, that will, I mean, I don't think that's the reason they became police officers. So looking at it and having that taken off of their plate and let them do what they came into this job to do, I think is really important because it gives you better job satisfaction. So I think there's a couple pluses there for us on that part.
So I do want to just provide an opportunity if there is anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this particular report this evening and the sort of 5-year implementation plan. Now is the opportunity just to get my attention and let me know, and we can open up a mic for you. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item? It doesn't appear to be the case. Certainly, we'll be having many more discussions as we move forward with all of this and opportunities for public input as well. So thank you again, both Chief and Deputy Chief, for being here this evening and sharing this with us.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us then to our second extensive business item this evening of the ones we have here, and that is to continue discussions as it relates to the License and Passport Center and Dance Studio as that relates to the implementation of our maintenance facility construction plan going forward. So I believe I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon to kick off the conversation, and as we need assistance from others and expertise that may come into play. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a quick recap, as you recall, June 16th, which is the last time we met, we looked at various options and cost estimates for the Maintenance Operations Center and the License and Passport Center and Dance Studio. In the end, after receiving all that information, the council, generally speaking, preferred option C or concept C is shown up on the screen. And what this would do would utilize both sides of Woodhill for the Maintenance Operations Center, so a little bit different from what we originally envisioned. Fill in that yard space on the south side of Woodhill with additional building for all of our activities. Then primarily move the yard across the way out north of Woodhill where the Lexington Shops currently sits, and where we would have our fuel station, our storage bins for salt and sand and some other material, as well as another building, kind of that light brownish color up there on the top. And there are a couple different configurations, but generally the concept is the same amongst those configurations. We would also, as part of that, look at constructing a license and passport center on the first floor and a second story of the dance studio as a replacement on city land that's currently park, and it's the green strip west of the parking lot that's currently in existence. And the idea behind this was to utilize the land for those replacement uses that would be displaced by Lexington Shops being torn down. Construct a slightly bigger parking lot over the current one, and actually had additional parking north of the VFW to accommodate all those different uses. The VFW would stay in the same location, and the ball field primarily would stay in place. There might be some adjustments to that. That was the general concept, and as I mentioned, the council felt this was maybe a preferred option to pursue. But there was a lot of conversation that wanted to be brought back, especially about the License and Passport Center and Studio. So first, I would mention that, we're bringing back 3 different things today. Just more information about the Parks and Recreation Dance Program and facility needs, information about leasing space within Roseville or someplace in Roseville for the License and Passport Center and Dance Studio, and then information about the financing if we were to build a new building on city land for the License Passport Center and Dance Studio. So in your packet, Parks and Recreation Director Matt Johnson has written a memo about the dance program, the need for space to relocate once Lexington Shops go down, and that is attachment 2. And he's here to answer any questions that you may have. In regards to the leasing space, the city, leasing space in the city for the License and Passport Center and Dance Studio, I have the following to report back. I met with Steve Cheerhart and Ron Moss of Tatanka Real Estate Advisors. Both Mr. Cheerhart and Mr. Moss are commercial real estate brokers with decades of experience generally in the market, but also specifically in Roseville, and they have leased tons of buildings here in Roseville. They were really a great resource to answering some questions about the Roseville market in specific. So attachment 3 in the packet is a memo from them that outlines some details about the Roseville market, and also about commercial leasing in general. It's a couple things I want to point out from that memo, and I have a slide for this. So for the license center, if we were to lease space in existing retail space, and the retail space was chosen because you need a high visibility place that's compatible with other uses, has parking and easy access. There's rents from anywhere from $13 per square foot to $28 per square foot, plus another $7.45 per square foot, up to $13.21 per square foot for CAM, which is common area maintenance, and taxes. For a dance studio, we believe, could be located in a different location, in a more industrial area, a larger warehouse, for instance. That is much cheaper. That existing industrial warehouse space in Roseville goes from $6 to $8 per square foot for rent, and $3.50 to $4.50 per square foot for the CAM and taxes. So with those numbers in mind, for licensed and passport center, we would see a range of $212,000 to $428 annually. Obviously, it's all negotiated, so that's kind of gives you a sense of that. And for the retail existing, that's a 10,400 square foot building, which was indicated as needed for our space. Now, it's probably not exactly 10,400 square foot building, so you may have to go a little less, or a little bit more, but that gives you a baseline there. For the dance studio, I would note that the previous, in option C, is showing 8,500 square feet. And that's primarily a function of being on the second story of the first story of the License and Passport Center, but certainly would be well-used space. In talking to Director Johnson about what's the minimum space we would need to have a functional dance studio, that would be about 5,000 square feet. It could be more, certainly, but that would be kind of the minimum. And just for comparison, currently over at the Lexington Shops, we have about 2,200 square feet. And if you've ever peeked in there, it's well used, but it's pretty tight. So those were the comparables that we used. And so as you can see, for the dance studio, the range could be anywhere from $47,500 to $72,500. The other thing that I think is important to factor in and consider is tenant improvements. I think that was always a concern if we release, how would that work? According to Tatanka, that is typically a negotiated part of the lease, and most landlords will grant a tenant improvement allowance. And in Roseville, or for these type of uses, at least retail and kind of industrial, they range from $2.50 to $3.50 per square foot per year of the lease. So I gave an example because that's hard to translate. So if you had a 5-year lease of 10,000 square feet, just to use round numbers, it could range anywhere between $125,000 to $250,000 in tenant improvements that the landlord would pay for. That's all negotiable. It could be higher or less depending on the property, but that's kind of the range. So that's some basic information about the market. While there's some properties out there that might be a potential fit, we haven't gone to that step yet. I first wanted to bring back the information just to get everybody a sense of what the market looks like. And I would suggest if we do pursue leasing, we should work with Tatanka to help us find some properties, certainly a commercial real estate broker. A couple final things. I do reference this in the report, but in regarding leasing the License and Passport Center, as you know, we have $200,000 that we transfer from the License Center Fund to the General Fund for property tax relief, as we own the building and aren't paying any rent currently. These dollars will most likely need to be reapplied to the lease payment, and even then, as you can see, would not necessarily cover all of that. That would mean you would need to, instead of transferring it from the general fund or to the general fund, you would not transfer those dollars into the general fund. So that's $200,000 less that goes into the general fund, which certainly has an impact. We would have to make that up with additional levy and/or cuts proportionally on there. When we originally purchased the property in 2018, it was really predicated on the fact that we were paying lease payments and had significant improvements that we needed to make to expand, and the fact that it was a short-term lease, we couldn't get a longer-term lease, as we look back at it, that the council felt at the time we needed to purchase it so we get out of that cycle. That fortunately allowed us to transfer that money we're paying for rent into the general fund, and we built on that as we move forward here. So that gives us some ability to do that. Obviously, with paying a lease, we would need some of that revenue to come in because we don't want to be paying property taxes on that. And just looking at the past couple of years, the revenue that we make above and beyond covering our expenditures would not be enough to both pay a full lease, whether it's $250,000 or $400,000, and still put $200,000 into the general fund. So it's just a point of reference. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it either way, but it's just a point of reference. Just want to make sure everybody's aware of on that.
Can I ask a question? So you're talking about the lease, but if we build, we'd still have a debt payment to pay to build, so that 200 would go towards that as well. Because if we build, we'd have like $1 million debt on the bond payment. So basically, we would add that additional expense as well. So more than likely, unless we expanded our income, either option, you're probably not going to get, at least if it stayed at where it's at, you're not going to get the money.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility, Councilmember Shorter. And the only reason I say it's a possibility is because you could pay without using license center funds, using some existing debt levy, which we'll talk about here shortly. But certainly, if it's coming from the program, it would make some sense to do that. So either way, you're going to be using that money. It could be a blended approach where you use license center revenue, then the rest from some existing debt levy source. But yes. And then the dance studio, obviously we don't pay anything for rent at this point. So any dollars or any cost for leasing space would need to find a source of funding. I don't really have any particular option for you to consider beyond additional levy dollars, unless we can find some other sources of fund that brings in some revenue, but that covers the program cost as it is and does not have a surplus. So shifting then to funding, if we were to build a building on campus, as you would note that in the last report, it's about $14.5 million for the license and passport and dance studio on city campus. $11.1 million of that is in hard costs and $3.4 million is in soft costs. If we were to issue debt at $14.7 million, which is a couple $100,000 more just to cover some issuing costs, a 15-year bond would have a debt service slightly under the amount of $1.4 million a year, to your point, Councilmember Shorter. For a 20-year bond, it's $1.2 million. As you all know, we currently are paying about $2.4 million annually in debt service for the fire station and park buildings. That last payment will be done, and we would, in 27/28, but we would have the ability in 28 to repurpose that debt levy. That can mean a lot of things. That can go in a lot of different directions, including right back to the taxpayers, if you so choose here. But that is a certain avenue to cover that. And that's why I answered it the way I did, Councilmember Shorter. There is capacity there, but most likely you would want to look at some type of hybrid of using some of those sources. As I just said, the other ways to fund the building, if you didn't want to do that, would be a combination of license center revenues, which obviously would not be enough, and a new tax levy if we didn't use any of that. And then lastly, I just want to mention that we do have some comments from residents in the packet. I just want to make sure I call those out as attachment 5, and we received some over the holiday weekend, which are at your desk as well, that hopefully you've seen already. So tonight, we're really going to turn the ball over to the council to have a conversation. And what staff is looking for is making a decision on whether the license and passport center and dance studio should be in a city-owned and city-constructed building, or those operations should be leased space in some place in the city. Once a decision is made either way, we can then move forward with getting the RFP ready to issue. We know we're doing the maintenance operations center and get that in front of the council to issue, and then get that process started to both do the final design of the projects we're doing and the construction management. Obviously, there's a lot to consider here, and I know it may take a lot of conversation, and it's okay if we can't come to a decision tonight. That just means we're just delayed, but this is a pretty important decision. So while we're looking and hope you can come to a decision tonight so we know what our next steps are, we understand if there needs to be additional conversation or additional information brought back, we're happy to do that. But this is kind of at the point where we're kind of done presenting the information now for you to have some discussions about what the next steps should be.
Right. I did want to clarify two things before I open up the rest of the council discussion. A couple of the information, or the couple of the emails we got from members of the public referenced a cost for the License Center and Passport Center and Dance Studio of 19 million or more. I don't think we've been at that number. I think the number you said with the hard costs plus soft costs was 11 million something for the hard costs and about 3.4 for the soft costs, totaling about 14 and a half. Not that that's not still a big number, but it's not the $19 million that I'm not sure where that was coming from. For just clarifying for that, for the public. The other thing I just wanted to also do was follow up with you on a little bit of an email exchange and conversation we had today in terms of sort of comparing building costs with what we had in the Tatanka memo, which was something like $250 to $300 a square foot. And as I understand it, if you take what appears to be apples to apples with what they tend to include in that, if I'm not mistaken, you had communicated that our comparable construction costs for that building would be about 6.2 or 6.4 million or something like that. And if you divide that out, it's something like $330 a square foot. So it seems more in line with what that memo was talking about. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, if I could just, address that a little bit more thoroughly. So in the memo from Tatanka, they talk about a build-to-suit cost of $250 to $300 square foot cost. And if you do the math on what our total costs on that $14 million, that would get you,
941.55.
Right. So let me back up. I jumped ahead of myself. So that amount is only reflective of the hard construction costs of
Tatanka number.
of the Tatanka number. Does not include land acquisition. Does not include site work, design fees, furniture and fixtures, or contingencies. If we were to strip all the costs for our license center and dance studio, we would get that building, just the construction cost of the building is $6.2 million. Okay, and everything else around that is contingencies, site work, and all that stuff. That goes to $330 per square foot. So just better to have apples to apples. The $250 to $300 per square foot is just the construction cost. Our project's coming in at $330 per square foot, licensed passport center.
Apples to apples.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, in our 14 million number, obviously 3.4 is what's known as soft costs, which is the furniture and fixtures, design costs, and some of those other types of things. And even the $11.1 million of what is called hard costs in the Kraus-Anderson report is inclusive of design contingencies, construction contingencies, and inflation factors on the price. So I think the 6.2 million is probably the 2025 price to be apples to apples with a 2025 $250 to $300 per square foot current cost of construction, as I understand it. And correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
no, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then I did also, just from a process point of view, and then I promise I will open it up for the council, as to the financing of building with bonds, my understanding is that we don't issue the bonds based on this early concept estimate that Kraus-Anderson has done. We issue the bonds on a much more firm number that comes farther down the road. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the timing of that. Is it based on the actual bid construction costs or the final construction costs? When are we issuing those bonds, and when do we start paying on those bonds on this project as it relates to that 27-28 timeframe when the existing city hall or fire station and parks bonds come off?
May need to have Finance Director Petrick help me a little bit, but generally speaking, right now for conversation, we're expecting that we'll get, if we move forward here, get the final design done and get that bid out. And so we would know what that amount would be at some point in 2026. And I believe we would issue the bond based on the contracted amount that we would award. So whatever that number is was what the bond would actually be. So it'd be reflective of the actual cost to cover that. Kind of aggressive to do all that in 2026, but that's what we're thinking of right now. So if we do issue the bonds some point in 26, the first bond payment would probably be due in 27.
27.
Yeah.
And the debt service runs that we had Ellers run for us do assume issuing the debt later in '26, so we did factor in a potential interest adjustment. We don't know what the bond market will be doing, obviously, so we had to factor in some additional interest points into those debt service numbers. But yes, the assumption is you wouldn't issue the debt now based on high estimates. You would issue the debt based on your firm bids for construction and the other costs.
Do we still usually at that point include some contingency in the issuance of the amount that we issue for the bonds? Because I'm thinking sometimes in construction projects, there might be some overages, those types of things, or
We
change
can.
orders. Yeah, I just don't, I'm trying to remember back to when we did it for the fire station and parks, and I don't remember, so.
And I wasn't here then.
Right,
but-
exactly. But you're still the expert in the subject matter, for sure.
But, and usually, that's why, if you'll recall, we didn't sweep the excess cash reserves out of licensure fund. So there will be reserves there to handle some of these contingencies potentially. But yes, sometimes when you get your quotes, there's usually a 5 to 10% contingency built in.
And
And
even with the timing we've talked about, as I understand it, in '27, there may be some overlap of debt service on these bonds and the remaining debt service on the last year of the
There
park. and-
can be,
and fire
or
station.
we can also build in capitalized interest if the council chooses to wait until the existing debt is done, rather than having a slight overlap.
Okay.
You would end up paying a little more interest. But that is one of the things that you can potentially do, is have a no principal payment due that first year and a half, and then build your principal chart through the remaining years.
Got it. Okay.
So-
No, thank you for that. Appreciate that. You may want to stay handy depending on other questions. I don't know if that means sitting at the table for sure, but, all right, now we'll open up for council questions. Councilmember Strawn.
So I believe I read in the information that we would expect of a new construction 30-year use. Is that correct?
That would be the goal, certainly, for 30 years of very viable building use.
Okay, and that would be a fairly steady cost at that point then, as opposed to relying on someone else's landlord-tenant relationship throughout that as kind of the mortgage holder or whatever. I'm not sure. I'm used to being a homeowner, not a
The leaseholder.
leaseholder, yeah.
Well, certainly if you own something, I mean, there's costs that you're going to have to do, and you can fairly predict it. Obviously, things break unexpectedly and stuff, but we have a lot of experience operating our facilities, and so, there's some sense of that. I suppose maybe what you're getting at, there might be some variability on the leasing market. Even if you have a good lease over the years, the dynamics could change, the costs could change. It's hard to say what that would look like. I really couldn't speculate that, but to that. It's hard to say if it would happen or not. I would think we would be a pretty good tenant for any user. We're pretty solid. We're not going to go out of business in a couple of
Yeah.
years.
When we figured out this leasing costs, were we considering, I think in some of the Design C, there was something about facility storage for the Parks and Rec as well as some offices. Were those included in the estimates for the Passport and Dance Studio?
So that was primarily for the dance studio, for Parks and Rec storage, and for some office staff. That's not figured in. The 5,000 square feet is just kind of just for the dance center. So the storage may be able to be accommodated in the maintenance operations center, and we'd have to look for creatively for some way to have some office staff, and that's primarily our seasonals. Right now, we have space over there, so we would have to, once again, maybe look at the maintenance operations center, if there's some space we can carve out there, but we would have to solve for that. I don't have a particular answer for you tonight, but those things were not included in that 5,000 square foot estimate.
Okay. And then I'm sure I know the answer, but if you could just kind of reiterate for the public, was there an intention at any point, if this did not pass, that the dance studio or the license center would be shuttered because of not getting the referendum passed.
That was never my understanding, and others may have some different thoughts. I don't want to speak for everybody, but my understanding was that due to the needs of the Maintenance Operations Center, we were going to relocate the License and Passport Center and everything else in Lexington shops, including events. And as a result, we needed to find some alternatives. So obviously, the original plan was to construct a new building using sales tax proceeds. That obviously failed, so we're at this decision point whether or not to continue building a new building or look at some other alternatives. But I believe it was always the intention of the council as we led up to this referendum was to keep all those functions and services and operations moving forward.
Great. And then just last thing, I know there's been a lot of consternation about the future of license and passports, and we've talked as a council a lot about how we address many of the more unusual. We're not really like run-of-the-mill tab renewal, but I think for the foreseeable future, there'll be a need for an in-person option for some of the more in-depth things. And obviously, we don't get paid as well if they're a little bit more challenging. But I've had many people tell me what we could repurpose this for if down the road we didn't need it, a black box theater, an art studio. But I think as long as it were city space, we would have the option to potentially utilize that space for something future, in the future, based on the needs of the city at that time.
Certainly, you can repurpose any building. Obviously, the more improvements you make in and specify it, the more costly it is, but certainly it can be repurposed. I look at it this way, and this is just my approach, is that in fast forward 5 years, I think, especially for the License and Passport Center, there'd still be very same type of operation, still a need for that. There's technology always going to be evolving, and we've constantly changed our model. We offer drivers testing, not on the wheel, but people testing. And we also do dealer licenses and tabs. So we try to diversify that. So not always just walking in for the typical tab renewal. So that's going to change. Go 20 years from now? I don't know. It's really hard to say. I think it is very realistic that something's completely different. Who knows how we're registering vehicles, and then maybe not just be cars. Who knows? So that's the way I look at it. I think in the short term, I think certainly the need will continue, and that includes the passport side as well. Longer down the road, yeah, it could change, and that's something that we could adapt a building to. We've done it a lot of times in the city, rechanging uses and moving stuff around. So that's always possible.
Other questions? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, yeah, a lot of moving parts on this. And, when I looked at it, and actually, I think leasing is still a really good option on this piece, and I have some points I want to make about why we should consider leasing versus
If I
building.
may, we might want to just make sure we get the questions answered before we get into because I think that may lend itself to
Okay.
discussion, if that's all right.
Okay, well, that's because, yeah, some of these questions are kind of
I
following
mean,
up with.
if you have questions, I don't want to.
Okay, well, I can wait.
Yeah, okay.
can
If you,
wait if you
okay.
want.
I appreciate that. Other questions from council members? I did have one question about the concept C, and I just couldn't remember. I believe the discussion was that the newest portion of the sort of office and conference room and some other things in the existing maintenance facility on the southwest corner go away as part of the concept C, at least how it's been proposed. I don't know that that's maintained, but I couldn't remember for sure, so I wanted to double check on that as to what the plan, because I noticed it's kind of a pink color as opposed to some of the other colors, and I couldn't find the key on that, so I was trying to remember what the
I
plan
may need
was
some help,
there.
Jesse, here, but this red area is
It's
kind of a
that- it's
current
that
off
color.
salmon.
Yeah, so the option they shown and the cost estimate that was included basically redid that entire area, because it would be expanded, the locker room configurations. Most
So
of
it is
that
part of the facility, but now reconstructed essentially.
reconstructed, yeah. It's basically, because it's an expansion, the uses, a lot of that building's already been redone twice.
Mm-hmm.
It could certainly be remodeled potentially, but there probably wouldn't be that significant of a cost savings because you do have to expand the footprint based on the usage and the type because there's just really lack of office space.
Okay. No, I appreciate that clarification. I just couldn't remember for sure on that.
And Jesse, this purple area down there, there's that, right next to this red here, is that additional workspace? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, so the purple are basically like workshop areas, so like a meter shop, a Parks and Rec small engine. I can't remember the other ones. So they didn't really identify them since this is concept what it would be, but more or less that would be some sort of workshop space.
And even the footprint of the northern building that's would be taken out as part of the plan here looks like it's being used for some of those types of spaces, if I'm.
Exactly. So the existing north building, that's going away, but yeah, basically a new building is getting built on top of it as an extension of the current building.
All right. That was fairly late in our 16th meeting,
Yep.
so I couldn't remember all those details, so thanks for refreshing us on that. And then just, and I don't think this is for Mr. Freihammer, but were we to pursue the building on the site, I noticed that just on the same slide, the count of the parking spaces doesn't necessarily jive with the information from Tatanka as far as the parking estimates that they came up with for the similar spaces. So I think just our general perspective as a council historically has been try not to over-park facilities. So just that, I wanted to just note that as part of this, since the plan was up on the screen there. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Bauer.
One question that didn't get answered last time, and it doesn't need to be answered tonight, but I'd be curious to know if Concept C with the existing maintenance, reusing the existing maintenance facility was done because we asked them to reuse the building. I wonder if there is cost savings or speed enhancements if we were to just raise what's all there or not. I don't know if they explored that option or not because we didn't tell them to. But that's something I think we could figure out, not now, but going forward when they come up with the final proposal.
Councilmember Bauer, just so if I understand, so you're talking about this middle part, the newest part.
Just not reusing anything that's
Yeah, just
currently there.
tearing everything down.
Possibly remodels
Yeah.
cost more than
Yeah.
new construction
Yeah.
also with given time.
Yeah.
Not looking for an answer, but I just didn't know if they were directed not to explore such an option.
I can answer real quickly, but it's probably more conversation. So we did have first of all, we had some options that tore everything down at some of the cost. If you remember that condition facility report, this section was the best of there and had the least amount of cost to keep up in operation. The biggest cost for the central building is the roof. Right. The north building, the south building needed to see tons of stuff that it was worth it. So I think we went along with the belief that this was worth saving if we were going to keep stuff on the south side here, just because it already serves very well. It's only a 20-year-old building and it has the right clearance heights and this does not need a lot of work beyond the roof. So generally speaking, that would be kind of the quick answer to that.
Thank you.
And just maybe to expand a little bit on that, I would imagine that if we went forward, when we go forward with this part of the project, conceivably one could ask bidders to bid an option to tear it down and replace it versus reusing, and if we wanted to look at that. So that would be one way to get more information about that too, and actually consider it as part of a construction package.
Especially with the phasing with the C approach.
Yep, exactly. Councilmember Graf?
Refresh my memory on how this was going to work as far as we have to clear the land on the north side, so where does the dance studio and the license center go in the meantime?
So it's a really good question. So the first things, as I look at it, at least, since we need to start filling in the central part and start working on that, is we need to create space to relocate the fuel pumps and the storage bins, and also most likely to relocate some of our staff across the way, which means we have to start on the north side, meaning that we need to take down magazine and shops. One of the first things, which displaces license, Passport Center and the dance studio. So we need to find a solution for that first. If that is leasing, and you deal with that timing. If it's about building a new building, this would need to be constructed first. Before you would tear that down, once everybody would move over there, then you tear it down and do that. This is about phasing. If you recall, the previous plan, when we used that whole site, we were going to get the luxury, I guess, to use the parkland to start building part of the maintenance center without the need to tear down the Lexington shop until much later in the process. Now it's kind of flipped a little bit because
So we could build that building and have it moved there directly is one of the options.
build the license and passport center.
Yes.
Yes, you would, if you built that, you'd need to build that first.
Okay,
Move all the
that's what I wanted
operations.
to know. Thank you.
Unless you did something short-term in the interim.
Yep.
As an option. Yeah, okay. Other questions? All right. Then I do want to do one more thing before we go to council discussion, and that is just to do a check-in with members of the public. If there's anyone from the public who wished to make comments at this point on this item, this would be your opportunity. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item at this time? It does not appear to be the case. Now to council consideration. I believe, Councilmember Schroeder, you have dibs on the first comments under this part, so appreciate your patience on the question side of it.
No, that's what, because I do want us to consider all these different options, and with the, I didn't want to go into this automatically assuming we're going to build something where I think seriously needed to look at this leasing, so I wanted to put some points out there to consider as we're considering these things. So I got 7 points that I just want to make, and they are short. The first one is the public voted the building of the license center down. And I know the argument is that the referendum was for the funding of the project with sales tax, but the public did not see it that way. And even with some of the emails we just got recently, I assumed it meant the plan to construct a building was no longer an option, and I asked a few neighbors, and they made the same assumption. So I just want to make sure that the perception out there about us actually building it, the public does not see it that way. And then I know we talked about that the license center passport is, will it be a viable enterprise going forward? Well, the passport renewals are already online, and so I wonder if, even 5 years, and so I'm not so sure, that is a for sure thing, because I know the passport renewal software is actually improved and doing really well, and it came out really fast, so I'm a little concerned about that. And I actually wanted to make the point that I think the dance studios should be decoupled from the license center and have its own place. I think it should be part of the Parks and Recs and not tied into the license center. So I think we should think about possibly, is there a better place for that versus having it on top of a building like that. And then for this million for expense to pay down the debt each year, if we build this, it will put if you consider that that's an expense that's really part of the license center, so it puts it in the red if you actually put the expense where it belongs. And so instead of, having those additional funds, we're going to have to add more. And so I know, the city manager said we may not make enough to cover it, but $1.4 million is very different from a lease payment. And actually versus, this is 5, if we were leasing in an area that we could, the EDA could help us determine where we could put this license center. And actually that would give us an opportunity to expand the days and the hours. And I think it could then possibly even combine or do a contribution to the general fund, and at the same time do economic development. There's so many places in Roseville that might be a really good thing for us to be able to do. And then number 6 is budgeting is going to be really tight this year. And with the ask and resources needed with the fire and the police, they all need resources. If we're leasing, which is be between 200 and 400,000 versus paying $1.4 million on a debt payment, that additional money could go towards these other resources that we have, that we are needed for. It's kind of that priority thing. And actually, my last point is, then we don't have to negotiate with the VFW on the parking spaces or anything else. That just wouldn't have to be done. But again, I think just things we need to think about as we are deciding which way to go with this. And we're going to be going into the priorities after we get through this. And I want us to also think about that. If you're going to put $1 million towards debt service versus can you actually use that in a higher priority area? It's something to think about. So those are just some points I wanted to make.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Schroeder. Councilmember Bauer.
Yes, I guess echoing some of those points, I too received many phone calls and emails regarding the Licensed Passport Center Dance Studio, and I too, from those calls, residents, what I heard it was a referendum on should we build it or not, even though that wasn't the ask that was written. It does appear from the calls and emails I received that's how they interpreted. I will also note that, I guess going to point. Your third point, the dance studio was never part of that referendum question as well, so I would also be in favor of decoupling the dance studio from these discussions and putting that into a discussion of park budget. And regarding the passport renewals, I believe the passports are one of the more profitable parts of the license center, and I do have concerns with that going away. I think, if you can do passports online, it's going to be hard to argue other things can't be done online as well. Granted, there will always be cases where you need to go in person and emergency passports and whatnot, but there are facilities that currently exist for that. And same-day passports, I don't believe we can do. I do believe also that leasing is probably the way we should go for the licensed passport center. I agree that we would be a fantastic tenant, good financial sounding. We also provide a large number of, a huge amount of foot traffic to wherever we end up going. This is very attractive for people renting or leasing property because we would be, if you will, an anchor there, and that will spur other developments and other leases in that area. So I think we would be able to get very advantageous leasing terms, possibly better than what we see presented here. And again, I would argue we just talked about, budgeting is definitely will be difficult. And we just had the police discussion. We talked about their space needs. It's challenging to pay over $1 million, that kind of levy dollars for a licensed passport center when we are facing space needs right now with the police department. And again, leasing it also removes the parking need that we see here in Concept C, and removes all that parking, puts that back to green space as well. Not all of it, some of the existing parking, but it does remove that need.
All right, other comments or thoughts from council members? Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. I think I feel like I don't have sufficient information because I feel like we're still not comparing things correctly. If this space that we could add as an owned asset of our organization would have storage and offices, I think we need to be clear on what renting that space would be and make sure that we're actually taking the full costs in before we would make a decision. In addition, I recently have had staff who have gone out to several locations where they have same-day driver's licenses. I passed that along to Mr. Trudgeon and to
Your staff, right? Not
My
city
staff?
Yeah, I just wanted to
I'm
clarify that. Yeah,
an HR
got it.
person.
Yeah.
My staff have been utilizing the same-day license, driver's license, and there's 2 beta testing locations for that. And I've asked if that's something that we could consider. I just, that if we are able to stay on the cutting edge of some of the things, I think that's a great idea. One concern, you're mentioning a lot of things about this lease space, but one of the potential sites was noted as Gulf Galaxy. That certainly flies in the face of, which is no longer available.
Right.
But that certainly flies in the face of some of the discussions we had before about accessibility. That's not near a bus. It's not near, I don't even think there's places that you could walk on a sidewalk near there. So while there may be lease spaces, I also don't want to be in a shopping center that has been unsuccessful for 10 years or longer to have anyone stay longer than just a couple months. And especially a shopping center that has told tenants that they won't renew leases I just want to make sure we're in a viable spot that would actually have a longer term tenure to potentially, because to build the specialized dance floor, mirrors, all the things that it takes, it's not just going and having an open space. It's a whole set of things. I've also been told by some of the dance parents that they wait on the day of because there's such limited space. If we had the opportunity to have double the space, the parents and the people involved could increase greatly. When my kids were in dance, it was on the stage at Fairview Community Center, and it was not a desirable space. It was hotter than blazes back there. You had to traipse through the whole building to get there. That's not making it accessible or usable for people. And I guess a lot of the people are saying, well, you know, they can just go to a private facility or a nonprofit. And again, we don't build the ball fields or the tennis courts only for people who will put in a quarter on their way or $2 on their way in. They're part of what we have as a park amenity. And I realize we're going to have budget issues, but we will always have budget issues. And I don't think that the people of the city think that this is the time when we're going to take away things that people are paying to participate in getting an opportunity. Our city, as we know, continues to become more diverse, ethnically, every possible way you could slice diversity. And I think that means we have opportunities for more things, not for less people to be involved in the things that we have. And I really want to see exactly what it would cost, because over a 30-year term, I want to make sure that we know what we're looking at for pricing, because yes, in the short run, yes, I'm sure it's more expensive to build, but in the long run, over the life of the building, and again, this is Ms. Petrick's area and not my own, but to say, let's make sure we're looking at it for a long run and not just, there are people calling all the time asking why we don't have a community center. We can't always think 2 months ahead of us. We have to think longer, bigger, because our people have an expectation that they're going to have some of these amenities part of our city. And I just am not willing to take it away because we're thinking too short-sighted. Yes, we need safety, we need other things, but safety is also community, peace of mind, believing your city has your best interests in when you're setting things up.
Councilmember Groff.
So I see this as two different things going on here. In real estate, buying something is very different than leasing something. There are different reasons to do that. People who lease, if they're, I'm talking about residential mostly here, they're doing it because they can leave that lease usually in 60 days or a year, whatever that is. They're looking at something as short-term so they can get out of it. It's not that it's usually a long-term thing that's an advantage in their portfolio or something. If they're buying a house, they're building equity. It's sort of the same with the building. We would have something at the end of it. Otherwise, when we do this on a lease basis, and we've done that, if we have it for 10 years or whatever the lifetime is, we paid out that money, and maybe it's a little less, but we don't have anything at the end of that time period. We don't have a building. We don't have any other investment. It's just like money out the window. So those are the two ways I'm looking at this. And also, I don't think IDs and licenses are going to go away by some magic thing and that we're all going to be doing everything online. They've been telling us that for 30 years and it hasn't happened. So I might be wrong this time, I don't know. But when I go to the licensing center, there's a line out the door. I think we're missing business by not having an efficient building that is designed for that space and could accommodate the people that come to it. So those are the two ways I look at it. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. Perhaps this is where we'd have to put police department in the future. I don't know, but I don't have a crystal ball to see that sort of thing. So I'm trying to analyze what's in front of us right now. And we have, by having the building, we have control of it. When you're leasing, you don't have control of it. We would be a good tenant. Do you know what happens with good tenants? They raise the rate on them after their lease is up because they know they're not going to move. So our lease would go up. If we make a 5-year lease or a 7-year lease, it would go up.
As will all leases go up when they expire.
Yep. So,
good tenant or bad tenant, or
yeah,
you raise recess.
but we need to factor that in, is all I'm saying. If you have built the building, you are pretty much on a fixed amount.
True, just as repairs to buildings increase over time as well.
That
You
can all be
also have
factored in.
capital-
You can figure out a life of a
Right.
roof, you can figure out a life of an HVAC system.
And just as you figure that out when you're leasing a facility or a building as a business, you factor that in. The same calculations can be done. One of the reasons you end up leasing is because that's not the focus of your business. You know, if your focus is, you know, shipping, making widgets, your focus isn't, you know, running buildings or things like that. So,
But we already have setups to run buildings here.
We
It's
do.
not like we're starting out with nothing.
and regarding your point, as far as leasing or owning the assets, you know, leasing provides you opportunities with cash flow and things like that. Here, we're talking about paying for this building. As referred, you know, over $1 million bond that we're going to have to pay for with the levy. If we're able to cash flow it by leasing it, then you don't incur that. You still maintain the space open, just as you mentioned, maybe a possible location for something for police or something else. We don't lose the ability to have a building there. What we do is give us the options in the future for a building that maybe is more appropriate for our needs. So it's easy enough for a licensed passport center to find a location that's suitable for it as a lease. A little bit more difficult for finding the location and building, say, for police. I'm picking on that just because we talked about it. Whereas now we have this space here, you could do something like that. So the leasing gives us some, I look at it as a lot more optionality for us in the future, reduces some of our financial constraints that we have going forward as well. And so that's why I'm kind of in favor. It just lends itself very well for leasing.
Other thoughts from council members? Councilmember Strawn.
Again, I'd like to know where these great potential leases are, because I've been told by many residents that we lack good spaces for easy rental that haven't been sitting vacant for a long period of time. Yeah, there are some that are open. There's a fine shopping center that is mostly empty, but it's because I've been told by the past tenants and some of the current tenants that it's not a great place to be, because they don't have that reliability of what's going to be there. And so I've never once leased a car because I don't see the value of giving you my money and not having that, owning something of it, not having any equity at the end of it. Obviously, you take a risk, but at the same time, I concur with Councilmember Groff in that you do have something at the end. And if we're saying conservatively that a building would last 30 years, I mean, I think most homes in the city are twice that, if not older, and most of them are going to be around for a lot longer. So to say that at the end of 30 years it's just going to like magically explode and be gone, I think that's inaccurate. And we have this opportunity right now while we're building that we maybe wouldn't have in the future to bring this up. It's going to be less expensive to be part of a larger project than to do it as a one-off later on. So it's easy to say that it's just there. But I think we need to realize once we divest of some of these things, and I get that you maybe want to put it into parks, but parks also has to still have a home for this. Parks doesn't just have a magic place. You can't put it in a park building and for 2 hours a week. This is a all-week business, every day, 6 days a week that is happening. It can't be shut up, folded up, and put away for the next rental that happens. This is something that needs its own space. And so I appreciate that it's been coupled together so that the spaces can be dual use and that there's an opportunity to have this stay together. And I appreciate the commitment to the dance group and to just the arts in general, that it's an important piece. And like I said, I would like to see where we look at it long term, not just 4 years or 5 years, but 20 years. Tell me what that looks like over cost. If the dance studio is still around and we're paying all this time, where might we be at the end of that time? It's all a guess, but I'd like to have a longer trajectory.
Would you like a guess?
No, I don't want to guess.
Oh, well, I was just going to, it was a nice segue to one of
Thank
the
you.
topics I wanted to bring up. So I did look at sort of the range of lease costs that was in the memo. And then I tried to project that out over
Oh,
time.
good for you.
And looked at, presuming, I don't know if it's a good presumption, about a 3% increase per year. So over 15 years, assuming you were able to lease for multiple leases over that time frame, because I don't think you could necessarily sign a 15-year lease these days in this environment, but I could be wrong. You would be talking about between $5 and $10 million of lease payments over that time frame, as compared to 15 million or 14 point something million of investment in a owned property. If it was a 20-year time frame and you were leasing for 20 years, at those rates, the range would be something like 7 to 13 million, very, starting to approach the total that you would spend, for your building, basically. And at the end of it, you wouldn't have an asset, you would have just paid that money. Now, that was based on the 5,000 square foot. If we started saying, well, we do need a little more space for the dance center and the other things, potentially, if we went to the 8,500 square feet, now at 15 years, you're 5.5 million to 10 million. And at 20 years, you're almost 8 million to about 14.8 million, depending on where that lease, falls in that range that we were given. So we're talking about, millions of dollars of expenditures for something that essentially at the end, you don't have an asset. And so that definitely enters into the equation for me. One of the things that also enters into it in terms of looking at the cost of borrowing the money, the principal is essentially an exchange of dollars for an asset. The interest that you're paying is the out of, that you're paying the cost of borrowing the money. That's the thing you don't get anything back for. And under the 15-year bonds analysis that was provided, assuming that our cost was the 14.7 million, you're paying about over $6 million of interest over that time frame. That's what you don't get back. But at the end of it, once again, you have this asset. Now, at that same time, you might have spent $6 million on rent to kind of divide the range that I gave before, but you don't have an asset at that point. And then for 20 years, it's about $9 million of interest. And that's also right in that range of what you might be paying for rent over 20 years. I think that from my experience on the council, when the decision was made to buy the license center at the time, or the strip center with the license center in it at the time, we were having real challenges getting anything longer than maybe a 3-year lease, if I remember right.
That's right.
And the problem is that there were a lot of capital improvements needed to match the service, because it was really kind of a put together,
It's
not
specific.
terribly thoughtfully design at the time, because we had to move out of the space that it had been, the license center had been in before. And the council was really concerned about putting, I think it was somewhere over $500,000 of, or maybe $250,000 to $500,000 of improvements into a space that we weren't sure we were going to have 3 years later. And so that sort of colors my thinking in this regard. I think that there is a lot to be said for having a city facility at the end of this process, that if the model for license and passport goes away, like we were just talking about, there might be more need for seasonal staff for parks, there might be more need for storage for something, there might be more need for police training opportunities or something like that. And I liked some of the notion that was mentioned in the memo from Parks, even though it isn't part of the plan right now, of having that facility potentially provide a bit more amenity towards the Veterans Park area as well, the neighborhood. That would be interesting to explore. So in the end, for me, I completely understand, the point of view that some people thought, and I don't know that it's all of the no voters that thought that they were voting down doing anything with the license center. I certainly know that there was a lot of chatter about that at the time, that, why does the city need this facility? Why doesn't the state pay for it? I'm going to vote against it because of that. That was because of some misunderstandings of information about the project. And I don't necessarily want to make our decisions on a not terribly well-informed electorate, and that's on us, I think, in terms of our outreach efforts that we might have done at the time. But at the same time, I don't want to hang my hat on that necessarily, because I don't know that that's a completely accurate portrayal of where the community may have been in that regard. But I do think it's important to also keep in mind that All of our facilities are subsidized by the taxpayers. All of our recreation facilities, on average, about half of the cost of our recreation programs is paid by taxpayers. The other half roughly is paid by, the fee payers for those various activities. I think all of the parks and rec facilities and improvements that we did in that $19 million park renewal program 10, 15 years ago now, 15 plus years ago,
15 plus, yeah.
those were all paid for by taxpayers. That was 100% tax-funded project for the recreational needs of the community. And so I look at this very similar to that. Now, on the License Center, certainly there is a notion that it is an enterprise-ish operation, and we benefited from that transfer of, operating funds to the other city operations each year. I guess arguably, if we do the timing of the financing right with the debt service coming offline for the fire station and parks renewal, and, some debt service for this, even at the 1.4 million per year, that's still $1 million roughly less than what the debt service is now. Either that can be used for tax relief for the taxpayers, or some portion of it, or all of it, could be used for other city, needs that we have, including some of our public safety needs. So I'm supportive of looking at that. I think from my perspective, I'm just very concerned about that the notion of the leasing, just not getting anything out of it and spending a lot of dollars for something that we don't get anything out of. That's just my perspective.
And a lot of staff time, because when you lease, it's very different than when you have control of a situation. You have to be renegotiating that lease, you have to have someone on staff handling all that, or a broker all the time.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Actually, my family, we actually did own property and lease it, so I'm very familiar with how this works. And actually, you don't renegotiate very often. You can get longer-term leases, and a lot of times you can use a broker, so you don't need the staff for that. And actually, I know you said you had a bad experience. How long did they rent before this short-term thing came up? Was it?
I think it was probably an order of magnitude of maybe 10 or 15 years in that site prior to that.
So they
Maybe
had,
it was longer than that.
So
I'm
they had a
not 100%
long-term
sure.
lease up until that point?
There were a series of, it was up for renewal, say, every 3 to 5 years.
Every 5 years, I think we started renting there in 2000.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, I see the other side where you can actually have some very good leases with people that you actually, and how you can negotiate how often the rent goes up. It may not be every year. So I think a lot of times it's in different chunks that way on that part. But again, the part that I'm really struggling with is, again, the residents feel that they voted this down, and I am not comfortable saying, yep, we're going to build it no matter what people think. I really think if we would have to have, especially if we're using bonds to do this, I think we would have to really, because when we did the fire station, my understanding is that was a long process. We got people involved, you got people to be able to talk about it. I just don't think, it's almost like people didn't get an opportunity. They think they voted it down, and now we're just going to build it anyways. I just don't feel comfortable unless we spent more time letting people, especially if we're going to use bonds to do it. I think they should have more of an input on that.
It wasn't 100% of the population that voted.
No, I'm just saying, but I still think that enough of them voted it down that.
But a lot of people voted it down because they got misinformation by someone who spent a lot of money to send a citywide mailer with the dual purpose of voting it down and defaming someone they weren't interested in on council. So they had a nefarious alternative
But the
goal,
maintenance center
but
got voted
they confused people, and this is definitely on us to have done a better job. But you sat here too, as we also sat and talked about what we wanted our very limited language to say. And yes, it could have been better, but as I just confirmed with Mr. Trudgeon, we did not. The goal was never, if it didn't get voted down, that the process and the program would no longer exist. And so sometimes We're not going to please all of the people, but if the goal was to keep these programs operable, we've heard from several loud people, but there are others who are in support of this. We've had other people who
Guess I
live
don't get to
adjacent who
finish my
are.
talk.
Councilmember Shorter.
Yes, yes. Well, as I was saying, please give me the courtesy just to finish what I was trying to say, was, again, when you're using bonds for the residents, and you're talking 14, $15 million, I think we should give our residents the courtesy, at least not a lot of people watch this meeting, and not a lot of people hear it, and so I do think we need to do more. It is on us to communicate it, but I think if, it's one thing to add a program or keep a program going. It's another thing to want to spend, 14, 15 million to build something that a lot of people felt that, and even if you say it's only part of the population, how many people actually know now we're going to do bonds to pay for this? I think that's even a very small percentage of people that understand that that's what we're going to do. And so I think if we're even thinking about doing this, I would want to make sure we have enough, the open house, the public, information on this, so that they feel that they're part of the process. People were part of the process on the maintenance center, and they had input and all that, and I think we owe that so they can have the process for this too. So that's my thought.
Councilmember Bauer.
You mentioned an asset, and I'm not opposed to having assets. I would question the allocation of, increasing the levy for a licensed passport center when that, for a licensed passport center building, when we have other maybe things that would be better assets. Going back to the conversation we just had, space for police or something. There may be a better use of, if we're talking building, there may be a better building to be constructed if you're looking for allocating funds to an asset. And I think this is an opportunity for us to, by leasing out leasing the licensed passport center, to be able to do possibly both those things, depending on what the final lease cost is that we have. Again, going back to my earlier comment, leasing this gives us options in the future, whereas if we build this and we make it a licensed passport center, you're now, you've lost some options and ability in the future. And if I'm looking at the needs that Roseville has, a licensed passport center is not as high of a need as for residents as maybe some of the other things that we, should be building, and as you mentioned, allocating funds towards an asset. And I would echo that, leasing in businesses is just the normal thing, and I've had fantastic leases with fantastic, and I actually can't, my friends that are in business too, I think it's more of it's the rarity that you end up with a bad lease. And it's unfortunate that happened here with this, but, with using the right broker, and I've used multiple ones, you will be able to find that great, and as Councilmember Shorter is, you can build into the lease contracts what the increases are and those things, and put limits and ceilings and tie them to, various different costs. There's all kinds of different ways, but that's what you get with a good broker, and they will do all that work.
Right. And I did just want to say, the notion of better assets bothered me a little bit, because essentially it's a rectangle building that has a first floor that could be pretty much anything office type related, and then the upstairs dance studio / other components. I think all of that space has a lot of flexibility for the city, so I don't think we're tied into having a license center for the next 30 years. We're tied into having a building, but I don't think we've ever, in the time I've been on the council, had a case where staff has said, well, we've got all of our space needs met for the next 20 years. We're good. I think that, if a model changes, if dance programs don't end up being offered 10 years from now, we still have a building that can be used for a lot of different things that we own and have. And I think the difference between the city of Roseville or a city and a public entity and a business is that business is very much about cash flow. And it's not to say that we aren't concerned about that necessarily as a city, but at the same time, we're concerned about providing services and providing benefits to the community. And there's a lot of benefit to having something that we own and control, as opposed to, not having that. So that's where I'm coming from on that. Councilmember Groff.
I wanted to thank the mayor for figuring those numbers. I was trying to do that myself, but I was not as complete as you were. And I thought that was very, very important information for me to have in balancing this out. I think also I look at it as it is a building and it is stability. And I think as far as the city goes, I look more to it that way than a lease. You probably have had good experiences with leases. We have not. I have many friends who have leased spaces, and then after their lease was up, they were basically kicked out of the space because they raised the rent so high they could not afford it anymore. So that's been my experience with it. I think it's great that you two have had 100% of positive stuff with the leases, but I'm looking for the residents and for what could happen in the future, and that's how I'm viewing this. So that's why I think we have to look carefully and responsibly on this.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, and I think maybe what, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Councilman Bauer, but when he's talking about the space.
You may need to be facing the mic a little better.
So you may
Get
need to, I think it's more the short-term space need too. So if the police could, need the space, I don't think we're talking 10 years down the road for that too. Not so much what, not so much, I think that definition of better is more urgent needs of space would be a better way of saying that versus what's a better asset. Because again, I think we do need to consider where we're going to put the police space too, and do we need to consider some of that in this? And I think the thought is you could short-term or long-term lease to give you time to try to figure it out. I feel this is just kind of like rushing into just this is the only option versus thinking about a more longer-term approach to it. So I guess I'm not sure about that. Why even leasing for a number of years would not be a thought to give us more time to figure it out too. So.
Councilmember Strawn.
It's hard not to smile because I've definitely felt these same things in my time. Since I've been here, a lot of these things had already been decided, and it's hard when you're not part of that initial decision-making and you feel like you want to start over. But I do know that we are on a time frame now. The time is ticking where we have already started collecting the taxes for this maintenance building. And so this piece needs to be determined in order for us to start the project that we have gotten full approval from it was a very close vote either way, but we got a majority vote to move forward. And so we, as much as starting over with the public opinion and everything, and boy, I have been very difficult in the last 4.5 years saying, why can't we start over? But things have moved down the road and a lot of decisions have been made. And I don't see that we can start at the beginning. Because we now have signed saying we are starting to collect tax and we are using it for a purpose. So we don't have infinite time. And I think, again, it goes back to, yes, we could release for a short period of time, a couple years, but there are the build-out costs for any of these things that are going to happen. It would be much nicer to do it once in a permanent facility than to do it once. You can't just pick up the things and repurpose them in the new space. One for one, you are going to have a loss of many dollars worth of things, and so I just, I understand the concern, but we own this land. This is ours, and there's pieces of it, and we've had neighbors who've been opposed and who are ready to say, "Yep, we could do that," and I think that's really important too because they've been part of this process and frustrated, and they had questions all along. And now they're ready to say, yeah, we're okay with this particular plan, the ones who have come forward. And the others we haven't heard from, and if they were unhappy, we would hear from them a lot. So I think it's silly that we would try to find a short-term solution because so much of the cost is at the front end of a lease. That's where the build-out, that's where the getting ready part happens. And so you've already dumped that money basically just down the drain because you aren't going to be able to repurpose that in a short period of time. You're going to have to start over from zero when you finally decide that you're ready to move forward with something.
We prepared to have a motion before us at this point to try to move the conversation forward, given that we're at about 8:20 here.
Well, the motion would be to proceed with concept C, I suppose, and get our requests for proposals started. Is that what we're looking at tonight?
I believe it would be, it would be a
That'd be
motion
one more
either
motion, yes.
either to lease or to buy, basically, I think is kind of the direction that I think staff
To
is
build.
looking for, or
Build,
build.
yeah.
I'm
I
sorry,
would like
yes.
to make a motion to build the two-story passport license dance studio on the facility as our first step of concept C1.
I'll second that motion.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn to use the build approach, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Strawn is the maker of the motion. I know we've said a lot already.
I don't have anything else.
All right, Councilmember Groff is the second.
I think we've covered it.
All right, other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Bauer?
I do think when we're talking about building this building going forward, you're building a building for its purpose is a dance studio and licensed passport center. While you can reuse it and repurpose it, it's, it would make more, the longevity, I'm concerned about the time frame and the duration at which a dance studio and licensed passport center can exist and be functional. And I also, ignoring the fact that we're now settling an enterprise fund with debt, even though it is a building, I don't see that timeline for the licensed passport center in that entity to exist at the same length and span as it's going to take for this building to be paid off for. And we'll be left with the building, well, maybe reconfigured. We'll have also challenges to be reconfigured, and we're isolating ourselves and limiting ourselves what we can do with that space in the future. So for that, I'm against this idea, along with a number of other reasons.
All right, and Councilmember Schroeder?
Yeah, and I think actually if we had decided to lease this, it would be faster because the maintenance center could go ahead and still go ahead. So we aren't starting over with the whole project. We would actually be able to get that moving. And now, since we're building, since if someone thinks they should build this first, now the maintenance center will be, I think, also delayed. So either way, it would be very quick to also, I don't think we'd be starting over on it. So I guess that I don't think that's the truth on that side. But again, the sales tax will be spent on the maintenance center, and we just have to be very careful that you're making sure that this project has nothing to do with the sales tax, because you can't combine the two of them, and you have to make sure that they're very separate projects anyways from that standpoint, so.
Yes, which would definitely be the case no matter how we proceeded, for
Yes.
sure. And I did want to just double check on the license center. I'm not sure that we truly think of the license center as an enterprise fund. And I don't believe that it's appropriate to tie the entire cost of the debt service to the license center. I think this would be a city facility, and it's the city of Roseville, the taxpayers of Roseville that are purchasing this facility. One of the functions within the facility will be a license center, much as when we originally established the fire station on the site of our current fire station many years ago, and for a period of time the license center operated out of there. It was a city facility. It was paid for by the taxpayers, and it was used as a license center. I don't necessarily see this as being terribly different from that. The other piece of it is that, from my point of view, the cash flow still works, especially if we're looking at the potential to repurpose debt, or the debt levy that we're currently paying for our Parks and Rec and fire station debt. For this type of debt, I don't think that affects the cash flow necessarily from a cash flow perspective of the license center. If the license center still operates on an operating profit, then that could be contributed to the operating costs of the other departments of the city. because we're paying the debt service from debt levy essentially. So that's my perspective on that. I don't know if there's any other discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 3-2 with council members Bauer and Schroeder in opposition. And I would just note, it's okay to have 3-2 decisions. Sometimes it happens, even on the best councils. And there are many, many more steps to either process, either path forward, that will still have to happen. Certainly not the least of which is to get the final information about our costs, and so we know what our debt service costs will be. Once again, we've been very conservative on all these numbers, and so, and also I should note that any of those steps will involve opportunities for public comment, and certainly we would expect to hear from the public on those. With that, I think it might be appropriate, since we're about 25 minutes past our time, unless the council just wants to wrap up the remaining items, we do have another half-hour item.
I would encourage a small break.
Okay, let's go ahead and take about a 5-minute break then. Thanks, everyone. We're back from a short break here. Are you hearing us out in the room here now? Can you hear us? Okay, all right. I just wanted to be sure. I wasn't hearing myself back as I was speaking, so I wanted to make sure I was going out over the sound system here. We're back from our short break, as I said, and we're to our third business item already this evening, believe it or not, and that is item 7C, which is to review information on related to our 2026 budget discussion and tax levy discussion as it relates to tax-based changes in the city, legislative changes, and other impacts, as well as then to talk a little bit about city council goals as they might be for the 2026 budget. We have our finance director, Michelle Petrick, with us this evening to bring this item before us, and so I'll turn it over to Ms. Petrick. Thank you.
So I'll start off with some of the changes in property values. The Ramsey County Assessor's Office posts an annual report on their website. It's no longer in print format, and it's preliminary assessed market valuations. Those valuations will change throughout the year. They'll change if people tax petition to have their values reassessed. And it's the first valuations that we're able to obtain, the ones that are really important to assessing our levy, determining the impact on our single-family home, will occur later in August. For 2026 budget, the single-family homesteaded home is increasing by $18,200 or 5.05%. From $360,400 to $378,600. Other properties are listed on this chart, where you can see that other residential increases depending on the type of housing. Commercial went up in the retail and industrial, but it has decreased in the office valuation area. And one would think, well, maybe that overall our property value for all types of property increased 4.61%. And since the residential is slightly higher than that, one would think that maybe there's going to be a swing to the residential side of the equation. However, 40% of our tax capacity is for residential homesteaded properties. 60% of our tax capacity is for all other property classes. So we really won't see that swing to residential versus commercial industrial. I think commercial industrial, if anything, it's going to be a balancing act. There are so many property classifications for apartments, townhouses, the commercial sector, that you can't be precise in how budgets and levies will impact individual properties. But as a whole, our valuation did go up 4.61%, and that's better than the valuation increases that we had in 24, which were used for the 25 budget. All property types totaled a 1.1% increase in value. So that's what we have at this time for valuations. With regard to legislative actions, there are very few bills that we're aware of that may have a significant impact on the city. And the League of Minnesota Cities does a wonderful job of issuing a law summary. That'll be coming by the end of the month, we believe. We do know that we did not get our state bonding for the Oval and have submitted those capital improvement requests into the next bonding bill. So with that, our 26 budget, we are building in standard cost of living adjustments at 3% for non-union, which is what's currently in settled union contracts. Wage steps are factored in. Healthcare increases are factored in. There are contractual obligations and professional services and other general inflationary costs that will be included in the budget. We have 2 union contracts that the city manager is currently negotiating, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to include those contracts in the 2026 budget. And with that, I guess I will turn it over to Pat to continue. Yeah.
Or beginning stages of building the budget.
So it would be interesting to look at that aggregate change, single family total versus all the other classes total, just to see, because that probably tells us to shift more than these numbers can. Is that part of the August information, or is that even later than that?
It's actually part of our preliminary official statement that we're issuing for the fire engine debt. So I can get you that chart.
Okay, I think that would be helpful to the council and the public. Thank you. Other questions? All right, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, just real briefly, in the RCA, we talk about just some things to frame up a conversation, and this is really for you to discuss anything and everything you want about the budget as far as any guidance you want to give me, some things you want us to pursue. So we just framed up a couple things that we thought might be helpful for a conversation. You can take it or leave it. One, obviously, we know public safety staffing requests are huge in this budget. We've talked a lot about them, so we don't need to rehash all that. But just if you have any guidance on that or any thoughts on that would be helpful. Just very generally speaking, service level prioritization. Is there things that are important for us to keep and maintain and or approve, or things that maybe we don't need to maintain or continue to do? And would love to hear any of that feedback on that. I know this is maybe hard for everyone to decide on a number, but if there's a certain percent levy increase you have in mind, that'd be helpful for me just to be aware of it. As with everything, it's no guarantee that we can get there, but it'd be helpful to know kind of maybe where you're thinking of. And then, if there's anything coming from the strategic plan, we're still in the development of the work plan, so we're really planning to incorporate that into the next budget cycle, but certainly if there's anything that comes to mind at this point you would want to bring up on that. I would just end with we have the cash reserve. That's something that we always want to take a look at. You can see where we were at the end of 2024, so that's just a snapshot in time. I would mention that we do have a cash reserve fund, balance of $840,000. I am expecting that's going to come into play as far as assisting us in the budget. So still sorting out kind of where that would land, but I think part of the reason that fund was created was to provide tax relief in the future. And I think, to be honest, I'm looking at using all of that to help us with this budget cycle. So that's one-time money. It's not ongoing money, so you have to be thoughtful in how you use it, of course, but nevertheless, that's something that will come into play. So with that, I'll just maybe turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor, for conversation and take notes.
All right, we'll open up for council questions and thoughts. Councilmember Strong.
Could we continue to project that cash reserve information? That I don't think the public saw that on the.
Oh, put it up on the screen. You
We
mean?
lost that on the screen, yeah.
That was right from the request for council action.
Yeah.
I have the case.
Mr.
pull it up.
Trudgeon will bring it up.
Yeah.
I don't think the public saw that if they were. Just right there. Thank you.
Great questions from the council or any feedback or thoughts, Councilmember Bauer?
Just a quick question. Can you clarify roughly where are you projecting a 1% levy increase equating to dollar-wise? Is that roughly?
I think it's about 300,000.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted, that's what I had
Yes.
as well. I just wanted to check.
We have about $30 million left.
So like $1 million is roughly a little over 3%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Other questions or feedback?
I guess
Councilmember Groff.
one of the questions you had is what do we feel comfortable with? And I don't feel comfortable giving you a number yet. I need more information because
Agreed.
I want us to have the services that the residents want. So for me to just pick a number is too arbitrary at this point. I need more information. I need us to go down the road and have a little more input from all the department heads as we go along.
Councilmember Power.
Yeah, in here you also asked a prioritization. I think echoing what Councilmember Groff said, it's hard for me to prioritize when I don't have a list of things to prioritize. I might have like personal things or things I have from residents emailing me, but it's difficult to prioritize in a vacuum. I would like to see more from each department and maybe, knowing what their lists are and what their prioritization. I think it would be beneficial to understand the cuts. I know some departments work, are tight and cut harder maybe than other departments, and to see that full list would be beneficial. And I don't know if that's possible, but that's a challenge I have in trying to prioritize this. So I do realize that, we're facing a difficult budget situation here. There are some things that we, in Roseville, that we don't do that other cities do, franchise taxes and things like that for capital improvement plans. We do use a lot of, along those lines, we prepay for a lot of our CIP items here. It may make sense, while this is just somewhat a temporary relief, but it does have good long-term consequences of maybe looking at using debt instead for that, as the Finance Commission noted in our joint meeting. That may alleviate some dollars for you for this challenging situation we have with now the Licensed Passport Center and Dance Studio, along with the police and fire asks as well. I can't say right now if that's a good thing for it to do, but I would be interested in seeing some financial modeling done to evaluate transferring over some of that. It does make sense for some of that long-term infrastructure cost, I think, to use debt for that instead. But again, I would have to see the full financial model to fully evaluate that. Okay.
Right. Other thoughts, questions, Councilmember Groff?
I would just echo that, but I would want to see what it was because it would need to be a long-term, something that would make sense to
Yes, I'm
fund that
thinking
way. Yeah.
pipes and
Yeah,
water mains.
exactly.
These.
Not our annual police car
No.
purchase that is the same every year.
No,
right? Yeah.
not that.
Maybe we could just lease our police cars.
Oh, dear.
All right, I don't think you like the terms.
Time to stop.
Yeah. Councilmember Schroeder.
Actually, I had that on my list as well. I wanted to see, because of ever since the Finance Commission talked about that, they thought we were being too conservative and not using debt for the long term. I too was thinking that it made sense just to see what the modeling around it would look like. Because if you're going to buy a house, you get a mortgage.
Right.
And so if you're going to invest in a long-term asset of the city, that would make sense that you could match it that way and then use some of that cash for more current things. And so, yeah, that was one thing. And I do, from the prioritizing standpoint, I'll have to say, the public safety piece, I know I want to see it all, but, I do think we want to make sure and realizing that needs to be up there in the mix as that piece of it too. So, we're bursting at the seams in some ways, especially at the police department and stuff. So it would be good to, now we've seen a couple of pieces, but to see more would make sense. And I think the other part that I think residents are a bit nervous about property taxes. I've gotten a lot of calls about that. And because of the uncertainty with some of the funding, I think the counties and which we can't control, and some of these other things are probably going to go up. And so, and again, that's something we can't control, but I think we need to be aware of that. So we want to I've had a number of people make that comment, don't tax me out of my house because we have a number of senior citizens have called me on that. And so I just want to make sure as we go along, sometimes the list is big, but sometimes we might have to make choices to make it reasonable for people, because I don't want, you can see that in some other communities where people get priced out of their homes, and I just don't think that's something we want to be known for. So I think we want to just be, having that balance there. And obviously, we want to get our community, the services they want, but then making sure that it's, not going to, be this and this and this and this. So then we may have to make some choices. So again, that's where, talking a commissioner or a council member Bauer talked about seeing the list of things. I think that would be helpful too, because we want to make things reasonable, but still have things get done.
Other thoughts from council members? Councilmember Strawn?
I would just echo, I think it's important to see what the priorities are for the staff members, and we did a great job of keeping our budget substantially less high than others, or less increased than others, and I think we have to realize that as the state has less funding and the federal government has less funding, there'll be things shifting and pressing on us. So I think that we just, it's probably going to be a moving target all summer long as we learn more about the impact of some of the things that are happening outside of our control. So I think I would say at first, dream bigger, because it's probably just going to get pared and cut and reduced from there as we prioritize. But it's good to know. It's always helpful to, we have no idea, shifting fortunes, but at the moment, it appears that we're going to have to be pretty conservative, but especially if we want to try to bring into some of the public safety things.
Councilmember Groff?
And I know I have done this in the past, and when you bring the budget, some things can be moved from one year to the next, so I'm sure you'll bring that to us again, but that's helpful for me when I'm looking at the big picture. Maybe we can move things down the road a little. Some of the departments were able to do that. You can't do it forever, but I always appreciate that.
Especially with capital.
Right.
Do look at that.
I did want to just kind of tie into the thought about considering or looking at potentially the franchise fee model. I know that has been talked about in the city in the past, and I think one of the concerns that people had was it was just sort of a shift from my left pocket to my right pocket for the taxpayer, and I certainly understand that. One of the advantages of a franchise fee that we could consider is, especially if we look at it for our street maintenance funding, because that fund is slowly depleting, and we continue to have to add more current tax levy into that to pay for those activities. That might be a situation where we say, we're using this much levy for, we're adding more levy, and we've already got this much going towards those street repairs. If we use a franchise fee system to pay for street repairs, maybe that levy funding can be used for other things that mean we don't have to add for other expenses, where we're not necessarily just doing the old shift the pockets thing. The other thing that I think would be interesting in that analysis would be, because the utility franchise fees are paid by all utility payers in the city, that's a different pool of a source of funds.
Right.
Bigger pool than the property tax. So to the point about people getting taxed out of their homes, it may be a situation where if somebody has relatively low utility bills, a small home, their share of the shift from property tax to utility franchise fees might actually be a more advantageous share for that household than continuing to pay for things through the property tax. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Councilmember Bauer, and that was something that actually I think Pat and I talked a little bit about earlier, so it was a convenient timing for all that. And maybe there was method to that madness on Pat's part, but I think that is something maybe it's time to look a little more closely at. There was one other thing, but I can't remember what it is, so I'm going to recognize
And actually,
Councilmember
the
Schroeder.
franchise fee, I brought that up with Pat earlier because that, when I was up at the League of Minnesota Cities up in Duluth, there was a workshop on that, and I attended that. And in that workshop, they asked, how many of you cities are using a franchise fees? Everyone but me raised their hand. So just about every city, and I think, Pat, you can collaborate this, that all our neighboring cities are already doing this. And so it's not a radical idea. And that you're right, Mayor, that it's a different pool because you get everyone then. You got, everyone pays for that, not just, the residents. So, and you got people that are exempt from property tax that also have to contribute. Because especially when you're talking about streets, that's only reasonable that everyone has to do a share of that. So anyway, so I think you have a number of us that have been thinking about that, and I appreciate that Councilmember Bauer actually brought it to the forefront for something to discuss. So I think that is an opportunity for us as well.
And I did have a comment on the use of bonding for some of the capital things. I think where we've used it before is where we have a sudden increase in need, like water tower project moves ahead 2 years from where we had planned it, and we can't set aside enough money to pay cash, so it makes more sense to borrow for it. I think when we did some of the analysis early on in our studies of capital stuff, if it's sort of the ongoing kind of things, all that happens is instead of saving up for it, you're just paying for it down the road. It's the same amount of money in and out, so it doesn't necessarily have that advantage. But I think where there are those shifts where something comes up that we need to, it's a long-term asset and there is, we haven't saved up for it, it makes sense, like a fire engine, to do that sort of debt service for it. So that's what sort of is in my mind in terms of that. I know there are entities out there that do just sort of rotating borrowing. Every year they cycle off X dollars of debt and they cycle on X dollars of new debt. And so they just kind of always have a churn of debt service. I don't know that we're in that model necessarily. Maybe we get there at some point, maybe, but I
Doing
think
that with the passport center.
I think there is some possibility to look at certain things in that regard. So I appreciate that advice from the Finance Commission, and I think it does make some sense.
Yeah. Something to look at.
Sure. Other thoughts? Feedback? So we'll look for that 1% increase in the levy then?
You got it.
You got it. With the 3% COLA, yes, that'd be interesting.
Yes, it would be the magic wand. Have you got your magic wand handy?
No, I left it at home.
Ah, darn. All right, well, thanks for that discussion. First of, or I don't know if it's the first, second or third maybe, of many budget discussions over the course of this year. That then does bring us to a non-business item, which is consideration of the city council minutes from our June 16th meeting. We did have a draft brought to the council for our consideration in the past days here, and that feedback has been incorporated into what we received recently from staff. Are there any additional changes or corrections to the June 16th minutes as presented, or a motion to approve as presented?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Bauer, to approve the minutes of our June 16th meeting as presented. If there's no discussion, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those minutes are approved. That brings us then to the consent agenda minus item 10E, which we took up earlier this evening. Mr. Trudgeon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10A approves payments in the amount of $2,891,545.77. Item 10B approves awarding a contract to WSB to provide survey services to show the elevations of pond bottoms and pond inlets, and to provide recommended maintenance activities and estimates for 20 stormwater ponds that will be worked on over the next 3 years. Agenda item 10C approves the final payment of $4,974.77 to the contractor for the 2023 drainage improvement project, which made improvements to several stormwater facilities throughout the city. Item 10D approves entering into a grant agreement with Metropolitan Council to receive $9,000 in grant funds to provide for water efficiency rebates as part of the Metropolitan Council's equity-focused water efficiency rebate program. There's no matching requirement by the city as part of receiving these funds. Item 10E was already dealt with. Item 10F declares commission midterm vacancies. This year, we only have one vacancy on the Public Works, Environment, and Transportation Commission. The city council will interview candidates for this opening, I believe, on the evening of, August 20th. Coming up, we'll provide notice for that, but we just have one vacancy, so that's, should not take the whole night. Agenda item 10G approves entering into an agreement with Capital City Regional Firefighters Association to provide mutual aid to surrounding communities. This agreement formalizes a working relationship amongst the fire departments that have existed for numerous decades. Item 10H approves entering into an agreement with the American Parkinson Disease Association to provide standby EMS services during an event hosted by the association in Central Park. The department will be reimbursed for staff costs for any services provided under that agreement. And finally, item 10I approves the Ramsey County Hazard Mitigation Plan. Ramsey County is asking all local jurisdictions to approve this plan. Adoption of the plan will allow the city to access disaster mitigation funds if a major disaster occurs. That is the consent agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion on the consent items minus E?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, second by Councilmember Schroeder. Any discussion on the motion?
I just wanted to add that hazard mitigation plan is pretty intense, but as we can see from the news every day, it's actually really helpful that there is such a thorough, thoughtful process in place. As everyone knows, when they're actual in time of trauma, it's hard to come up with a whole new plan. So it's really nice to know it's there and that it's part of the whole county and we can work together. So I was very supportive of how in-depth that was and what it provided.
I'm sure everybody on the council did the same thing I did, which was to go search for the word Roseville throughout the report and make sure we were covered adequately. Right.
Highlighted it.
Right. Is there any other
Control
discussion on the
F.
motion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda items minus E, which was already dealt with, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye opposed. That passes unanimously. That brings us then to our future agenda review, Mr. Trudgeon.
All right, so we're back in the regular swing of things here. So next Monday, we'll have a meeting. Start off with the EDA meeting. We have a discussion of the EDA's preliminary budget and tax levy. That's a much smaller and easier budget to package up, so we'll be seeing that information pretty complete at that meeting. We also asked the council to consider a resolution of support regarding Oyate Ota LCA grant application. The Met Council, Oyate Ota, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, is a Native American organization that is looking to acquire the New Life Presbyterian Church on 965 Larpenteur. Apparently, that church is consolidating with another church in St. Paul. They are looking, as I understand it, to provide, the organization is looking to provide kind of a community center, food bank, and daycare for focused around Native Americans, but also open for all. In any case, more information to come on all that, but what they're asking for is a resolution of support, so there's no commitment on the city for any dollars for Metropolitan Council as part of the next grant funding cycle. And then we also have another resolution of support for high development, for development of the PIC property. Ms. Gunlack sent a communication several weeks ago that provides some more background on that. They're looking to build a spec industrial office building / office building. And they are asking for a resolution of support for a deed redevelopment grant to help with the contamination. They're also asking for some financial assistance for the city, from the city, primarily our TIF district, or HSS, which covers environmental costs, which we have an existing balance of. So we'll go through that conversation on that. So quite a lot of interesting things at that EDA meeting. We'll then shift to the city council meeting. We'll have a joint meeting with the Equity and Inclusion Commission, discuss streetlight policy, discuss close proximity building regulations and/or policies. This came up as from one of the asks from the Enclave subdivision, if you remember they were here a couple months ago. And also received the preliminary CIP that shows all the different expenditures on that. On the 21st, we do have another lengthy meeting, it looks like. We would have a presentation by Mary Jo McGuire. not because she's presenting necessarily, but this is first off.
Partially.
First bullet, right.
Joint meeting with the PWAC Commission. We have the Aldine right-of-way vacation coming back. I know you've all been getting emails. As I mentioned, some previous communications, we are doing a survey, which should be done this week, that I'll provide some good information. And we do have a petition in front of us right now, so that does change the dynamics of the vote. Just a simple majority versus a supermajority. We also will be bringing back County Road C crosswalks. The Ramsey County is further along in their planning, and they are showing some crosswalks that they have determined is needed. And so we have asked the county to come here to discuss that with the council. Remember, in January, we, as a council, did not approve any pathways or mid-block crossings. And looking at that, they have some thoughts on some need for crossings that are better marked with islands in the middle.
Will residents be notified?
Yes, we will be notifying them. I expect you will all be getting some communication in the next couple days from Fryhammer, but we'll be sending out notices by the end of the week. But as you know, that we had a lot of people show up for that, so we should expect the same for that. And I asked Mr. Fryhammer to make sure this easement vacation was a simple one. He assures me that it is. The last one, the PIC parcel. We've been having some challenges lately with easement vacations, but my understanding this is a pretty straightforward one. No necessary controversy. So as you can see, in July, we have some busy meetings here. Our 2 meetings in August are August 11th and 25th, and the 25th is when I will be presenting the city manager budget. And that's what I have.
Right, and you just mentioned that the interview date for
August
commission
20th.
would be August 20th.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'll make sure that's on the next slide.
Okay. Questions on the upcoming future agenda, Councilmember Strawn?
I was just curious if we had confirmed that we have quorum for all of these since it is summer.
Might be worth checking.
Differently.
Yeah, especially on the 21st, just making sure we had a quorum.
Will we have a quorum on the 21st? That's hopefully an easy question to ask.
Is everybody-
Unless, I mean,
It's on my calendar.
I'm scheduled to be here, but, you know.
I may be gone August 11th, but I don't anticipate being gone in July.
Okay. Sounds like we'll have a quorum. All right, are there any council member initiated items for future meetings or council reports or liaison reports or anything along those lines? Otherwise, the only other item on our agenda at this point is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn and seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to adjourn. There is no discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye opposed. We are adjourned by unanimous vote at 9:05 PM. Thank you, everyone.